and that's my new opening. I'm rather taken by my new opening, I must admit. And hi, Michael. Hello, spiritual vegan. Hello. So about 2 weeks ago, I made that opening, and then promptly forgot it. And so about 2 days ago, when I was setting up for this, I was thinking I must do an opening for the new series of Vegan Time Tunnel. And so I opened up the thingy that I'm streaming on now, and there it was. And I thought, wow, I'd forgotten all about this. Is it any good? And I thought, yeah, it's great. In fact, it's so great, I'm going to play it again. There we are. A bit of self-indulgence on my part. So so far I've taken up 24 seconds of your time just with the opening of the new thing. So there you go. Canadian Vegan Forever. Hello, Bernie V. Hello. I think we've covered everybody so far. So welcome along. I don't know whether this is a good time for everybody, but this is not necessarily the time I'm going to do this. I haven't sorted that bit out, but I just wanted to kind of do the intro just to announce that we're back on track, as it were, because the original series of the Time Tunnel has been taken down. And so I'm revamping quite a lot of it, but also including a lot of new material. So we've got 24 weeks of the first series, if you want. So that'll be revamped, modernized, and all that. And then there's also some new stuff, like, for example, next week, or the first one, which presumably is going to be next week, is about the British anti-vivisection movement. And so I think I'm going to call it something like Decline, Radicalization, and Decline. Although arguably you could say that it's been revived recently, at least in Britain, in things like Camp Beagle. But that's for next week, really. So welcome along to Vegan Time Tunnel Interactive, I've called it. And the idea there is that I want to try to interact with the chat much more than the first series. And so that's the plan. So I've called it interactive. And in terms of interaction, because this is going out to my YouTube, it's also going out to my Twitter, and it's also going out to the Vegan Review Facebook page. So in terms of interaction, if you want to interact with me, then the best place to go is, in fact, my YouTube, as this banner going across your screen says. I think if you comment on Facebook, I will see that, but you won't see everybody else's comments, because most people are on my YouTube channel. So if you want the full experience, as it were, then my YouTube channel is the place to be in that sense. And in terms of, just think, in terms of Twitter, I don't think you can comment, or at least if you do, I don't think I see that anyway. So anyway, this is the best place, this being Roger Yates' YouTube channel. So there you go. Okay, so today is a bit of an introduction, really, which I've kind of done, but I thought that it'd be quite nice to kind of incorporate a kind of short and quite dramatic story about an animal activist called Faye Funnell, which I never forgot Faye because of a strange name in a way. But yeah, Faye Funnell was very active in the late 70s and into the 80s. So I'm taking you back now to 1979. That's where we're at today. And that was 44 years ago. And the reason I always know it's 44 years ago is that 1979 was the time when I went vegan. So I kind of, I could do the maths pretty easy on that. Okay, so let's bring this up, which is our little kind of PowerPoint. I've called it Burning Fur, a Delayed Cremation. Okay, so yeah, so we're going back then to 79. And in general terms, this is me really, is that I've never really understood this kind of, this phenomena of people camping and queuing up for days to buy things. I can't, I've never really kind of understood that. And yet they do. In fact, this picture here, the color one, is from the Black Friday thing, which is what's going on. There's also lots of pictures of people queuing for days to get a new Apple phone, this kind of stuff. So, I mean, this Black Friday thing looks like you have to camp for a long time, and then you end up in some kind of rugby scrum, So it's all a bit weird to me, I don't quite understand it. I've got to admit. So anyway, I do understand 1979. So let's go back there. And so we've got Faye Funnell, animal activist, as I said, and she had this kind of little kind of pet peeve in a way. She didn't like the fact that department stores could get hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of free publicity by holding sales. And in those sales, they would offer a star bargain, which would presumably get the attention of the journalist. Even worse for an animal activist, of course, is that this star bargain was often a fur coat. And so Faye Funnell decided to act on this and, as it were, not accept it and kind of try to kind of protest both things at the same time, in a way. Now, she was great friends at the time with Kim Stallwood. Now, Kim Stallwood was also very active in the late 70s and early 80s in the British movement. In fact, he would become a central player in the radicalization of the BUAV, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And so that will come up again next week or next time, because that's going to be part of the story about the British anti-vivisection movement. Anyway, they used to meet, these two, and they would regularly go to meetings together and also demos, that kind of stuff. And one day in 79, Faye said to Kim, well, look, I'm going to buy a fur coat at one of these sales. And as soon as I buy it, I'm going to go out on the street and burn it. And so that was the plan. So for a week in July 1979, Faye slept out at Debenhams department store, Oxford Street, London, in order to be the first in line to buy this goddamn fur coat. The coat was reduced in price. This was a summer sale from £795 to £79. Now, those are 1979 numbers, so I don't know what it would be now, but it would be a lot, obviously. But £795 in 1979 was a lot of money. And even £79 was quite considerable as well. So at first they thought that their entire plan had hit the buffers early on, in the sense that they found somebody camping there already by the time they arrived. But then they quickly found out that this person had no interest in the fur coat. And so their scheme was back on track. So what Faye had done is organize friends and people to accompany her on this kind of quest, if you like, and especially at nighttime, which she said we are going to need some bodyguards at nighttime. And she praised the youngsters in the movement, as we'll see in a while, because they provided a nighttime kind of vigil, if you like. So the day of the sale arrives, and Faye buys the coat. Yes, just see what. And yeah, that's still a lot now. Yeah, it would have been pretty much. Actually, funny enough, in Kim's account of this, he does say, he does say, for example, that her husband was a pilot. She was kind of middle class. She was kind of well off, because he was making the point that she was very respectable, which meant that interested the press. But in terms of her kind of, in terms of being able to afford it, she was also able to do that as well. So she buys the coat, she takes it out, she plonks it into kind of like a basket type thing, and pours petrol over it and sets fire. So I got some pictures of this very thing. So the first one comes from Kim's 2014 book called Growl, and because it was Kim that took all these photographs of this particular event. So that's Faye right in the middle there, appropriately, as Kim said, dressed in black. And that's the coat burning. It's not very clear in that, but the next set of photographs, this is ironic because the quality of the photographs is worse, but you can also see what's going on a little bit better. So the first one, let's just get rid of me. The first one is Faye Funnell putting the fur coat into the basket. The second one is pouring the petrol. And then the third one is when the thing is on fire. And the guy giving Faye a peck, I believe, is her pilot husband, but don't quote me on that. And it's irrelevant anyway. Okay. So Faye made this statement while this event was going on, which got quite a lot of national press coverage at the time. She said 150 minks have died to make this jacket. As far as I'm concerned, this is just a delayed cremation for the animals. And then she did a piece in the Beast magazine, an exclusive piece, and this is what she said in that. Whilst 8 days on the pavement in Oxford Street is hardly to be recommended, regular visitors and supplies of food made the experience quite bearable. I could not, however, have gone through it without the dedicated young opposers of the fur trade who sacrificed their personal comfort to form part of a nightly bodyguard. And she finishes a little report. By the way, these beasts are all available, the entire series. In fact, like even a couple of specials, which I didn't know about until recently. They all appear on a website called the Talon Conspiracy, Talon, the Talon Conspiracy. So you can see that. In fact, that is an incredible archive of stuff. But don't read too much, otherwise you're going to ruin my vegan time tunnels. Okay. So, and she also said, this is how she finishes her report. I hope that mink will eventually cease to be looked upon as a status symbol. And I also hope that in future, Debenhams will give serious thought to offering something of real value, which is not offensive to human decency. Now, bear in mind, this was the age of single issues, which is another one of the time tunnels coming up. And so from a vegan point of view, we probably think, wow, if we were to look through that shop now, as then, we're going to probably find thousands of things that are probably very offensive and also, violate the rights of other animals. So there is that as well, that kind of little kind of time shift in that. And the final thing about the beast itself, this is number 2 of their series. It didn't last that long, but it was well produced for the time. And this is number 2, and this is 1979, obviously. And it's got Burning Mink there as the kind of bottom headline, if you like. And at the time, I was working for Ford's Motor Company on the production line. And I got a job, well, I was put right at the kind of start of the production line, as it were. And my job was I had to hook this, kind of back axle, bring it up, and then move it onto the production line as it moved underneath me, and then turn around and get the exhaust pipe and kind of hook it through and all this kind of stuff. And I do remember that when I first was given the job, certainly in the first couple of days, I actually thought that the job was impossible. And I said that to the people around me. I said, you can't do this job. It's not possible. They were quite happy that I couldn't do it because it slowed the entire thing down, which meant it was easier for them. However, within 3 or 4 days, I was kind of like doing it like a robot, to the extent that I got 12 seconds in between cars. So a car would literally fly in over me and then land. And and so I was reading The Beast at work, And so I read these magazines 12 seconds at a time. And I just always kind of remember that. Now, coincidentally, that's the time of the new intro, but that is a total coincidence. Deb, did it? No, I don't think so. I think that might have been different, but don't quote me on that. Could have been. I mean, obviously, Bite Back. I think what you'd have to do is, if you go onto Talon Conspiracy and look on the inside cover, you'll see all the contributors, and if they're the same, then that would indicate that they probably did, but I don't know for sure. Right, let me have a quick check in case I've missed anything. Yeah, this thing about queuing, it's very odd, isn't it? I just never said it. I mean, I suppose, you know, you're talking about getting something very expensive relatively cheap, so I suppose that's the reason. But yeah, I've never really understood it. Okay, I'm looking through the chat. What's this one? Stupid vegan. Okay. I shared your how farmers can combat vegan propaganda to our dairy farming, and the dairy farmer responded with slaughterhouse propaganda. Okay. What you mean, he posted some videos, or he said that? I'm not quite sure which one of those is thing. Yeah, and just to reiterate this at this point, that the full experience, the full Roger experience, if you want to have the full Roger experience, then it's on my YouTube, so that's where the place to be. Okay, so as I said, this is going to be pretty short because it was just the intro. Fascinating story about Faye Funnell, I think. As I said, I never forgot a name because of her name, but oh, right, he posted videos. Okay. Oh, right, well, I need to check that out then, because presumably, I don't know, are these industry videos? That would be interesting, because obviously the industry that slaughters other animals tend not to make that part very active. In fact, there's a famous kind of children's book. You know, the so-called meat industry used to send books out to schools in North America, coloring books, and it used to tell the story. I think it said from birth to beef or something. It was the story of beef, it was called, and all the different parts of it. Well, a lot of the different parts of it were there, but there was a total. The slaughter bit was completely missing. So you'd get you'd get the last picture being the other animals kind of smiling their heads off, as it were, on the truck on the way to the slaughterhouse, and then you just jump to them being dead and cut up into pieces. The actual slaughter bit was not there at all. Yes. Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, how can they dress up a slaughterhouse? You know, somebody on that video did say, well, you know, aren't you in danger of making a welfare point? And I don't think there is such a thing as welfare footage. I think it's the claims around it that make things welfare. So if you're saying this is a example of animal use is a rights violation, we oppose it. So it would then become a thing. Now, my final act then is to show you the new end to this series, which I did do about 2 days ago, because I'd forgotten that I'd done the intro, but I hadn't done an outro, if that makes any sense. So, okay then, people, thanks very much for tuning in. And it'll be a bit longer next time, because we'll have a bigger story to tell. So, bye for now. Ta-da. Hey, Earthlings. How's tricks? So this is an announcement about the return of my time tunnels. They are back, resurrected, and Phoenix from the ashes and all that. And so they're going to start. Oh, yeah, I've got a new intro. Now, Bernie V, cover your ears or turn it down. So the new series, it starts on Thursday, this coming Thursday, and it's my 7 p.m. So you'll need to do a little bit of working out in terms of what it is for you. And that's British and Irish 7 p.m. And it's going to be about vivisection, or more precisely, the opposition to it, the campaigns about it, etc., etc. So I've got my little books out and I've been reading them, including this one. I can't really show you them very well on this because it's really weird. It works when you do that. So that's Slaughter of the Innocent, right? So that's 1979, Hans Royce. The green screen doesn't like books. And so that was the first animal rights book that I ever bought. 1979, but then I found out it wasn't an animal rights book because the author, Hans Royce, doesn't believe in animal rights. He was a scientific anti-vivisectionist, claimed that human beings are selfish, and the only way to end vivisection is to appeal to their self-interest, and morality will not do it. Anyway, that's what it's all about, and that's when it's going to be. And I'm reading up. You know, these things don't just happen, you know. Also, don't forget tomorrow, that's Tuesday, we've got Still Alive with Ronnie Lee, and it's about the starfish story. So Ronnie doesn't like it. Everybody in the world loves the starfish story, don't they? And Ronnie doesn't like it, and he's going to tell us why. And I'm going to challenge him for being a boring old fart and a nasty piece of work. Something like that. So don't forget, Thursday, your date for the new time tunnel. We've got about 25 weeks worth of stuff to go. And then the first one's going to be new stuff. And then there's going to be a lot of revamps of the first series that need to be modernized. And then there's going to be new stuff built in as well. So we should end up getting about, I don't know, 30 weeks out of it, at least I would think. So that will keep us busy for a while. So people, you take care, and I'll see you again.
What is objected to in this leaflet is not the suggestion that McDonald's is junk food, but that it kills its customers.
Cancer.
Torture.
McDonald's. Rip off.
Hello, Earthlings. So, MacLibel, yes, indeed. If you tune in this Thursday, my time, that's Irish time, 7 p.m. for the latest time tunnel on MacLibel. It's going to be a goodie. SHIT, etc., etc. So there's a lot going on. We talk about the 1990s here. So we're also talking about the longest English libel trial. That's what we're dealing with. So according to Wikipedia, this will get us kicked off. That font of knowledge, the original case lasted nearly 10 years, which according to the BBC, so must be true, made it the longest running libel case in English history. McDonald's announced that it did not plan to collect the £40,000 it was awarded by the courts. Now, there's a bit of a story about that because that implies that McDonald's won the case. It was kind of halfy-halfy, as we'll see. Helen Steele, one of the MacLibel 2, announced when they came out of court that they would not pay what they were ordered to pay And she said, well, anyway, we're broke, so that they're not going to get a penny out of us. And following the decision, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in Steele and Morris versus the United Kingdom that the pair had been denied a fair trial in breach of Article 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is the right to a fair trial. And their conduct should have been protected by Article 10 of the Convention, which protects the right to freedom of expression. The court awarded judgment then of £57,000 against the British government. Now, exactly where that went to, I'm not quite sure, but that's what the kind of beginning of the story says. As I mentioned, there's lots and lots of resources on this one. This one, for example, this is the MacLibel full documentary. And if you can see that there in the bottom corner, it's Spanner Films. So if you go to YouTube and put in Spanner Films, you'll see that. So this is the documentary which shows the defendants going through the case. There's a really interesting bit where I think it's Helen Steele, one of the defendants. It's Helen Steele and Dave Morris. I think she had a bit of a burnout, and so she kind of just had to have a few days off and kind of called in sick to the court, as it were. And I think she went and she walked up a mountain in order to just clear her head. And at the top of the mountain there was some McDonald's rubbish. So she was thinking, well, there you go. Yes, probably went on the welfare grant. Yeah, you never know, do you? Okay, so Spanner Films for the MacLibel documentary, which is pretty good. There's also a fairly new, this is like the newest thing, I think, in terms of what's out there, is this thing from the BBC, but this is BBC Radio called The Reunion. And so as you can see there in the bottom picture, I've put the audio onto my YouTube channel, so you can find that there. And so I think my YouTube channel, and then if you just search McDonald's, MacLibel, that kind of thing, you'll get that as well. That's quite interesting because the defendants are looking back, and a lot of people were looking back. I mean, for example, the leader of the opposition in Britain, Sir Keir Starmer, was their lawyer, and he kind of did that free before he was corrupted by politics, folks. So that was interesting. There's also been some reconstructions of the trial. So these are really quite interesting as well. Actually, going through the transcript of the court, all the kind of intricate kind of arguments that went on. It's really quite an interesting thing. And there's part 1 and part 2, and this is all on Paul Gravett's YouTube channel. And Paul was one of the original defendants. So they originally McDonald's originally sued 5 people, and 3 of them ended up apologizing on the grounds that they were told that they couldn't win, really. And then 2 decided to stick it out, and so that became the MacLibel 2. So if you go to Paul Gravett's YouTube channel, you'll be able to see these kind of reconstructions, which are really quite good. Mac Death is in trouble over here now for violating child. Oh, right. What a shock. Not. Yes. Well, indeed. Yes. Well, you wouldn't kind of be too shocked no matter what they what they violated, really. Obviously they've been very kind of anti-union, and so that could be tied into that, getting underage workers, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, Deb, not one bit. Paul Gravett is an interesting character because he was a MacLibel defendant, but he's also been involved with the Spy Cops thing, which has kind of been a bit of a scandal, which I'm going to kind of come on to in more detail a little later. But one of the MacLibel 2, Helen Steele, was involved with that. So Spy Cops has got a website. I'll show you that a little later on. Also, Paul was part of the Radicals and Revolutionaries series, which was run by, I always get his name, I think Alan Starr, that might be wrong, but Starr and the cranky vegan, Jake Conroy. And so Paul was still there on the Radicals and Revolutionary website, and he's got a two-part interview. And in the first part, he talks about his involvement with MacLibel and then Spy Cops. As I said, Helen Steele was one of the women who were deceived by the Spy Cops, and so this is a book that she co-wrote about that deep deception. And there's also, going back to MacLibel itself, this is a book that John Vidal, well-known columnist for The Guardian, wrote, MacLibel and Burger Culture on Trial. I've not actually ever read that one, but from reports, it's pretty good. And also the reviews are pretty good as well. And then apart from those substantive things, there's quite a lot of other things which are quite interesting. So if you kind of Google MacLibel, Google Helen Steele, I should say internet search, Dave Morris, you'll get a lot of other things. This is the Radical History Network, and they interviewing Helen Steele there, as you can see. Now, I don't know whether you can see. In fact, I'm not even sure if I can see that. Let me see if I can get this full screen so I can read it. Because she was saying that she was involved in London Greenpeace, various different campaigns. Housing was a campaign. They did work against the poll tax. They did environmental campaigns. They did animal rights. They supported strikers. And she said that she would involve lots of different struggles. And she was also a paid and unpaid driver at times, taking poor pensioners around, and also groups of kids and that kind of stuff. So this really was kind of fairly kind of standard in the 80s and 90s, with animal activists being involved with lots and lots of different things, all kind of entangled, as it were. Okay, so let's go through the timeline for today then. So we start off as early as 1985, and this is when London Greenpeace launched the campaign against McDonald's. 1986, first publication of their leaflet, What's Wrong with McDonald's? Now, the interesting thing about the history of that is that it wasn't known until very recently that one of the spy cops helped write this. So one of the people spying on them helped write the leaflet that got them into trouble. 1990 is when McDonald's fight back and they sue London Greenpeace. I always make the point that London Greenpeace and Greenpeace International are not the same thing. So London Greenpeace is the anarchist group which existed before London Greenpeace, which is the environmental group, just to make sure that people are clear about that. Then 1994, the actual trial itself begins. 1995, in June of the year, McDonald's offered to settle the case by donating a large sum of money to a charity chosen by Dave and Helen. Helen and Dave secretly recorded the meetings, and there was a stipulation in this kind of offer that McDonald's said that they could criticize McDonald's, go on criticizing them, but only privately. So in other words, they could criticize McDonald's to their friends, but they weren't allowed to continue distributing the leaflet, and they weren't allowed to talk about McDonald's on the media. So that was the kind of criteria that was brought into play in terms of this offer of donating to a charity. And so Steele and Morris write back, and they said that they would agree to these terms, but only if McDonald's ceased advertising its products to the public and only recommended the restaurant privately to friends. In other words, exactly the same as the McDonald's wanted them to do. And of course, you won't be surprised to find out that McDonald's refused that counter offer. On the 19th of June, 1997, Sir Justice Bell delivered a more than 1,000-page judgment. Okay, so when we go to what actually happened, Helen and Dave were found liable on several points, but the judge also found against McDonald's. So that's what I was saying. It's a kind of like, some bits they won, some bits they didn't. Bell ruled that McDonald's had endangered the health of both their workers and their customers by misleading advertising. The advertising thing was a big part of it, and that even features in like the Animals film. You've got TV films back in the day where they were trying to suggest that hamburgers were grown in a hamburger patch. So you've got Ronald McDonald kind of running over, a little bridge with a couple of kids into the hamburger patch, and all that. So a lot of hype and a lot of distortion of reality of where they got their flesh from, of course. It was also decided by the judge that McDonald's exploit children, and this is where the idea of pester power came into purview, and I think at this time that phrase was coined, and so the idea was that they would start to advertise to the children and not to the children's parents. And this was in particular when they used to start doing things like advertising heavily in a lead up to a new Disney film and that kind of thing. And then they would do this thing about, well, if you buy a Happy Meal, you'll get a free character from the film that is about to come out or is just being released. I was a projectionist at the time, and I was pretty infuriated by all this. And because I do remember that when it comes up, get a free toy, in very small writing was a message to the parents saying there is an extra charge for the toy, And as I said, I was a projectionist at the time in Bangor, North Wales. So I had a slide projector out of a different porthole, and I kind of put an alternative message on the screen at the time, let's put it that way. So what makes McDonald's and similar chains so pernicious is how they often attract families there. And so it was a case where it became very, very popular for kids to have their kind of birthday parties at McDonald's. It became a really, really kind of important thing. And again, this is all kind of part of pester power. The parents didn't necessarily want to go, but they were kind of dragged there by their children, in effect. And in terms of what was said at the time, but this is a long time ago when you think about it, said the chain reportedly serves 1.2 billion Happy Meals every year. So that's a heck of a lot of Happy Meals, and I would say it's probably bound to be, rather more than that. In terms of Happy Meals, what was the alternative message? I can't remember now. Actually, that's where it is. But I'm just going to digress and show you a little bit of my sociology lecture that I did at VegFest a few years ago, and this talks about the Happy Meal and a particular kind of weird thing that happened. And so have a listen to this.
This issue came back into my consciousness a few years after the research in a kind of weird and unusual place. And it was this. Came back as a McDonald's Happy Meal. And in fact, there's a YouTube of the illustrator talking about this. And he's kind of going, wow, I did the illustrations for this book. And now McDonald's have done it on the Happy Meal. How fab is that, as it were? But I was thinking, wow, there's a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there? Somebody draws pictures of happy animals, and now there's bits and pieces of animals in this box. But in fact, it is actually quite easy to think about. And the real key to it is the word happy. So we've got other animals on happy farms, and what better to perpetuate this myth than that they find themselves in a happy meal. So everything is happy right from birth to slaughter, which is never mentioned in the first place. So it's not particularly difficult to think that these other animals find themselves on the cover of a McDonald's Happy Meal. It's not as shocking as we might initially think.
Right. Actually, I noticed as another digression, really. I noticed this. It stopped on this when it clicked back to me. In this, it reminded me when I was in prison. I was in a cell with somebody. I'll never forget their name. It was called Gary Moran Nuds. He was called, and he was a bodybuilder. And he said that I should take up bodybuilding because I've got very prominent ribs, so that my ribs stick out. And he said, well, that's perfect for building these kind of massive chests and everything. Of course, I've never done it, but it just reminded me when I saw that image to close with. Totally irrelevant to McDonald's, of course. Okay, going back to the findings then, McDonald's were responsible for the infliction of unnecessary cruelty to other animals. And this might feed into what Deb said earlier, that they had a negative attitude towards unionization, and they also paid very low wages. There's also a lot of controversy about this thing, which I think was called the hustle. And of course, this is where you get the idea of fast food, in the sense that there was a particular, it's all like time and motion, which was a big deal in the 1970s anyway, right across industry. I used to work at Ford's, and every action was timed to the second on the production line. But it would have also been the case in the fast food industry, where you've got a certain amount of seconds to get it out, kind of thing. And so that was always seen as a real problem for McDonald's, and that's one of the reasons why they resisted allowing any kind of unions in there. Okay, let me just drop this out for a couple of minutes. Just to put a bit more background in terms of London Greenpeace itself, the anarchist group. And most of this material comes from Gravitt's appearance on Radicals and Revolutionaries that I mentioned before. And we're talking about it emerging in the 1970s out of the anti-nuclear movement. So that's its kind of real kind of background. It predated and was distinct from the more famous environmental group, as I mentioned, Greenpeace International. Gravitt kind of suggested that London Greenpeace was more anarchic than the general animal rights movement. But I don't think that would have been the case across the board, certainly not in terms of the grassroots. It was the grassroots that did all these kind of entanglements of oppression and liberation type stuff. So they would have also connected the dots, because he said, for example, that things they were involved with were things like class war, which is another anarchist movement, animal rights, the movement, animal welfare, really. The Greens, that was part of it, even though that was seen as more moderate. But then they organized or part organized, or they were involved in a few events called Stop the City. I did a couple of them, I think. And that was where thousands of people would actually just kind of bring London to a grinding halt, as it were. It takes absolutely thousands of people to do it. And I do remember on those ones that every time anybody went past McDonald's, the place got smashed up. So that was one of the kind of connections to it. I think in the second one, every time you approached the McDonald's, you could see a big cordon of police around it to protect it. There's also feminist kind of strands to all of this. And again, it's really what David Nibert calls the entanglements of oppression and liberation. This was kind of standard stuff for these kind of collaborating movements back then. I always tell my own story about the fact that it was, we would often go on a hunt sab on a Wednesday and a Saturday, that on a Sunday you might go to a national march or a regional event or something a bit more illegal. But then during other parts of the week, you'll be going to Rock Against Racism gigs, or you might be taking part in a Reclaim the Night type event. I remember going to a few of those in Manchester, for example. And so it was all seen as kind of part and parcel, really. Okay, but going back now to the actual McDonald's thing, Paul Gravett says that the original 1986 leaflet was fairly high quality at the time, and I do think that's probably right. Although it was black and white, it seemed to be pretty high quality at the time. The original was 6 pages long, and it's actually difficult to find it even in the kind of official sites, the actual 6-page thing. Now this picture that I found today might be the one. You can see that it's certainly the fold out one, but I think it was condensed to 4 pages in the end, but it was originally 6. And then in relation to the bigger picture, this is not really the formatting that I'm familiar with, but this is a children's version of the controversial leaflet. So we used to give both of these out in Dublin, and the children's one was very popular, funny enough, and it was obviously formatted into an A5 shape, but it's quite interesting. In terms of the points that were raised by the leaflet, which ended up getting them into all the trouble, the language used, some versions talked about animal rights, but the more famous ones, unfortunately, talk about animal welfare. But the environment is in there, of course, workers' rights, the exploitation of children, the advertising bit again. And then recycling and litter was a big issue at the time. In fact, when I worked in a cinema in Romford, which is in a county called Essex, just not far outside of London, in Britain, of course, England, a McDonald's opened while I was working there. So I think we're talking about 1979. And some environmental groups used to go around the city or the town, collecting all this stuff and then dump it onto McDonald's doorstep, because there was a heck of a lot of it. And in the end, they kind of employed people to go around picking up the rubbish. They kind of used it to their own advantage in a way, in the sense that they would then have one of those kind of old kind of fashioned dust carts that you kind of, somebody pushes along with all the brushes and all that kind of stuff. And of course it would be festooned with McDonald's adverts and everything. Because I do remember that it worked out that every meal from McDonald's contained about 8 or 9 items of litter. So, things like the styrofoam, and then a piece of kind of paper on the top of that, the cutlery, and then the bags and all the rest of it. So about 8 or 9 per meal. So there's a heck of a lot of litter that was created. Right, as I said, of the 5 people sued, none of them had written the leaflet. So this is the kind of ironic part of it that I suppose wasn't really known even during the trial, because I suppose they were all, it's a little bit like all anarchic groups. There's a lot of collaboration and everything, but it turned out that one of the spy cops, somebody called Bob Lambert, had taken part in the writing. But ironically, none of the 5 who were picked out by McDonald's, because they obviously had difficulty getting the names of people, but the 5 names that they did get in the end were not involved with the writing of the leaflet. And one of the spy cops, in other words, a police officer, took part in writing this thing. So 2 of them decided to stand up to McDonald's, as I said, Helen Steele and Dave Morris. The other 3 apologized, including Paul Gravett, who explains all that in Radicals Revolutionary. And he said he was advised that he couldn't win, and he was advised by their lawyer, Keir Starmer. In fact, McDonald's had a history of suing or threatening to sue people or organizations for many years. Indeed, in In Britain, various newspapers were either sued or threatened, including The Guardian, over reports about poor working conditions in McDonald's restaurants. TV channels were threatened or sued, including the BBC. BBC were sued, for example, for a BBC Two program, which is called Nature, which was commenting on the destruction of the rainforest in Central and South America. Channel 4, which was a fairly new channel, they were the ones who showed the animals film in their first week of operation. They were sued. Veggies Limited. Now, Veggies is a vegan food co-op, despite the name, and they specialized in turning up at all the animal rights marches and demos with their big kind of vegan food stalls and everything. They devised the vegan Mars bar, which, as you might imagine, was pretty popular. The singer Morrissey was sued by McDonald's. And then in 1990, McDonald's turned their attention to Steele and Morris. And didn't they threaten to sue a woman in Scotland? Yes, that is true. Yeah, that's right. And in fact, I think also maybe a farmer too. Now, obviously, this is where things get quite absurd with these corporations, in the sense of, I mean, McDonald's in Scotland. Come on, right? I mean, how many McDonald's are going to be in Scotland? And so, yes, it is true. And so that is, you know, so if you open a shop and put McDonald's because it's your name, then you're liable to get sued. So there you go. So we've got Morris and Steele being the two defendants in the end. They were described as a gardener and a former postman from London. So this meant that one of the richest corporations in the entire world sued two of the poorest people in the developing world, at least. Helen Steele was on £65 per week, and Dave at the time was unemployed. Did I miss something there? Did I miss a comment? How could they sue over scientific? Well, because they Steele and Morris ended up getting lots and lots of experts. So this is all in the McLibel thing and the reconstructions. This is a fascinating story because they had to kind of go right around the world and ask experts, you know, on things like rainforest destruction and everything to give evidence. And of course, they didn't have any money, so they had to get these people to bring themselves, essentially. Whereas McDonald's had this massive team of some of the most highly paid legal people in the world against them. They tried to sue Supermax in Ireland. Ah, right. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah, Supermax. I think Supermax was one of the fast food places that really kind of hung out and didn't have a plant-based option until very recently. I don't know whether they still have. I don't know whether it came and went or what, because I don't go near those kind of places. But yeah, so they kind of hung out. But again, I suppose Supermax, I suppose that title is obviously playing on McDonald's too as well. So there's a bit of competition between the corporations. You know, there's a great joke where you know, talk about corporations and big things versus small things, where there's a person with a small shop and a big supermarket opens up to the left of them, and then a couple of months later another big supermarket to the right of them, and so he changed the name of his shop to Entrance, which is pretty good. So everybody walked into the middle of it. Those death corporations always think that they can say whatever they want. Their superiority complex is over the top. Yeah, well, I guess for them, it's always about market share, isn't it? You know, and it's also they're competing in a very competitive market, which is why I've always kind of made the point that if you think about it, you would think that of all people, McDonald's probably wouldn't need to advertise ever again. I mean, who doesn't know McDonald's, right? but they advertise on an almost daily basis. You know, in fact, we've had people come up to the stall in Dublin and say, "You people should stop pushing your views and on people." And I used to say, "How many McDonald's restaurants and adverts have you walked past to tell us this?" Right? And so, you know, it's just this kind of ludicrous idea that's all built in to all of that. Okay, so going back to what Paul remembers in terms of the trial, he said that he remembers that there was 36 trial hearings. Oh yeah, going back to the McDonald's and, you know, why they need to advertise. There's a sociological survey done once, a global one. It turned out that the Golden Arches was more recognizable to children throughout the world globally than the Christian Cross in the end. And so that goes to show the reach of these kind of corporations. But even they still need to advertise on a regular basis because they're in such a competitive market. So there was 36 pre-trial hearings. It's the longest libel trial in British history. 31 months, which is 3 times longer than any other trial. There was no legal aid at the time, and so that meant that that the defendants had to defend themselves. And again, the best account of that is in that Mac Libel Spanner one that I showed you before. It also wasn't a jury trial. That was one of the things that McDonald's insisted that there shouldn't be a jury trial. And of course, they will have been worried that if a jury of ordinary people and legal virgins, as the jury is supposed to be, they would look at the imbalance, right? And they would see 2 people struggling to create their defense against the might of McDonald's. And so obviously McDonald's thought, well, we can't have that. You know, it looks so bad, right? And so they convinced the jury that it should just be, you know, him only. They convinced the judge it should be him only. They claimed that the rationale for it was that the trial was very complicated and it was too complicated for a jury of ordinary people to understand. So that in itself says something, I suppose. McDonald's founder used to say that he's not a hamburger business, he's in a property business. Yeah, that is true. There's a clip in the Animals film where this guy has been interviewed and he's kind of, you know, in raptures about McDonald's and everything. And he's going, I think we're the Tiffany's of the hamburger business, all this kind of stuff. And yeah, but I mean, I think they had this kind of interesting public persona, and obviously Ronald McDonald was central to all of that, right? But I think it was a pretty ruthless corporation behind it. Hence the McLibel leaflet, in fact, you know, where you've got the Ronald McDonald mask, and then you've got the corporate person behind it, you know. Yeah, what was I going to say? Another thing about that. Oh yes, I don't know whether people will know this. You can Google this. I can't remember his name. I should have a note for it, but I don't. But the original actor who played Ronald McDonald, he quit. He went vegetarian. I don't know whether he ever went vegan, but he did apologize to children. And in fact, he put a book out all about that. And he was saying that he was very sorry that he misled children for so many years. So I suppose that's pretty neat, I guess. I know that he'd done a lot of talks about it. If I remember correctly, although again, I don't have a note on this, I think he might be on YouTube, but I can't remember. You'll have to Google Ronald McDonald to get the name. It's quite a long name, but I can't remember what it's called. Begins with G, I think. And there's Ronald McDonald. Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, there's one of those in Dublin, which when you first see it, you kind of think, seriously, you know, that you've got a wing of a hospital with a McDonald's sign on it, and you're just thinking, are you serious? And apparently, I think McDonald's kindly offered meals and stuff for this wing. So you almost like couldn't make things up sometimes when it comes to what these corporations are prepared to do. Paul says that the trial ended up being a public relations nightmare for McDonald's. And now, I mean, to such an extent, he says that they won't even talk about it. Their line now, they've got this kind of stock standard line now, and said, well, that was a long time ago. You know, that was then, this is now. We're a different company now. And so, you know, we don't want to dwell on the past and all this kind of stuff. And so, so that's part of it. I think Paul regrets apologizing. And he says that the brave decision by Helen and Dave, and the result itself, of course, probably stopped a lot of other companies from going to law to challenge the people challenging them. And he thinks that that might certainly be the case with vivisection concerns in Britain in the 80s and 90s, that they were kind of thinking about going to law to shut down, you know, injunct some campaigners. And then the McDonald's thing happened, and of course they thought better of it after that. It became clear over the years that London Greenpeace, that the London Greenpeace group had been heavily infiltrated by both the police and corporate spies from McDonald's. So there was agencies working for McDonald's and the police themselves infiltrating the group. And now this infiltration dates back, in fact, to the 1960s. But there is a kind of comical thing where it's said that if you look at the minutes of the London Greenpeace, some the meetings, there was more spies in the meetings than campaigners sometimes. And then there's even this idea that because the McDonald's spies didn't know who the police spies were, and vice versa, they ended up kind of spying on each other. And then I think they kind of sorted all that out and kind of let it be known who's who, that kind of thing. So this idea of going back to the 1960s, there was in 1968 there was a march in London, March the 17th, and that ended up being a riot outside the US Embassy. And 10,000 people had taken part in a rally in Trafalgar Square, but there was a break-off group, and they moved towards the US Embassy. And then the embassy was surrounded by police eventually, and also these mounted police officers that you can see. The Labour MP was called Peter Jackson, complained of police violence and of them using horses as weapons. And I remember that quite well. I once attended, must have been 85, 84, a demo outside a fur farm called Cock Sparrow Farm. And it was a peaceful demonstration, as I remember it. And then it got to around about 4:30, and it was getting a bit dusky. And so I think that the police decided that they're going to have to move the demo, which was right outside the fur farm at that stage. So they lined up their horses and just charged at people with them. And a lot of people had to kind of jump into a cabbage field, which was kind of along the way, and ended up being called in the press something like the cabbage field riot or something. But it was the police who started it. I mean, there is a famous thing that I think a pensioner got trampled by a horse, I believe. Anyway, going back to the London thing, 200 people were arrested, 20 injured, including 25 police officers. And so that was a catalyst, according to Paul Gravett, to this spy cop thing, which ended up being the big kind of scandal, and it's still ongoing. And he said the British state thought that this was a threat to its ability to control the population. And so they thought they had to do something about it, and they responded with setting up something called the Special Demonstration Squad, which started this infiltration. And so the full account of that is in the first one of Paul Gravit's Radicals and Revolutionaries things, because he talked about this kind of new type of infiltration and what it was all about and what prompted it. He said they started a type of infiltration of left-wing movements, which meant that police were planted as though they were long-term activists, and then they kind of got involved with these groups. And we now know that some of the police spies had relationships with the real activists, and some of them even had babies with the real activists before they mysteriously disappeared. There's one shocking story where one of the women who was duped by a spy cop, and then he kind of suggested that he was burning out and everything, and then just disappeared. And then it turned out that he'd gone back to his station, which was only a couple of miles away from where this woman lived. But, you know, he kind of had a shave and cut his hair and all that kind of stuff. And I suppose, you know, when you're an anarchist, you know, all the cops look the same. And so she didn't know for many, many years. It was a real kind of scandal. So that a lot of them just mysteriously disappeared. There's a timeline about all this, which won't go through, which is on spycops.co.uk if you want to check it. And so they can see the website there. There's some really kind of interesting pieces of that. The figures, though, that is produced by this group are quite frightening. For example, 1,000 groups were infiltrated over the years, and they targeted what they regarded as the left. More than 30 women were deceived into intimate relationships with the police officers. 42 identities of dead children were stolen, and this is the process by which they adopted a new identity. You go to a graveyard and you find the name and details of a child who had died, you know, as an infant, and then you'd recreate that kind of person, and you end up with their birth certificate, and you end up with a driving license in that name and all this. I don't know how to do it, but I've met people who reckon that they do. At least 3 female officers had intimate relationships with activists. Now, whether that's included in the 30 women ones, I'm not sure, or whether we're talking about 33 altogether. In terms of, I don't know, obviously things like sexual orientation there, so I'm not sure about that detail. And then coming to the end, this is the podcast thing on the Spy Cops thing, which is really quite interesting. I had to listen to a couple of these, and institutional sexism was quite interesting. And of course, there's been some scandals of late about police officers being found guilty of sexual assault. And then in terms of the first one, which is called consent, it was the idea of them being duped into a relationship, which they would not have chosen if they'd have known who they were dealing with. And so that was obviously a consent thing. One person, for example, described that she was 19 years old at the time, and so duped into this kind of relationship, you know. And so the issue is the difference between sex and the R word there, which is interesting. Going back to the sexism, I remember a demonstration in Liverpool that I attended. I was arrested for. It's outside something called the Devil's Tower, which was a vivisection block, a part of Liverpool University. So we dubbed it Devil's Tower. We had a camp outside there and everything for a few weeks, I believe. And there was a couple of bigger events and, you know, occupations and all this kind of stuff. And so there was a few people arrested and thrown into a van, and I was one of those. And this copper got in, and I remember him reaching over and just grabbing the breasts of one of the female demonstrators, and he said to his colleague, "Oh, I've never felt a veggie before." So that's what you're dealing with sometimes, you know. And apart from the usual thing about once they arrested vegans, they would always offer them egg sandwiches and all this kind of stuff. along with the usual stuff that they do with prisoners anyway. Like if you need toilet paper, they give you one sheet, you know, this kind of stuff. A lot of crap that goes on in terms of those kind of things. Right. Okay, so that's, like I say, I mean, this has taken almost 50 minutes, but this is really like an introduction to this issue. And so, as I said, you know, if anybody, you know, watching the recording, then, you know, if you go back to those initial resources, in particular the visual ones, you'll find that pretty rewarding, I would think. Right. A lot of crap on one piece of paper. Figures, yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's your time tunnel for this week, people. Very pleased that you could make it. We've got a couple of minutes if anybody's got any last comments. There's people talking about fridge magnets. What's fridge magnets got to do with McDonald's, people? What's going on? Right. Okay. Well, in the absence, then, I will say goodbye and thank you so much, as always, for tuning in to the Vegan Time Tunnel. Hey, Earthlings. Hello, 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 and welcome to yet another Vegan Time Tunnel. So we're creating an archive, which is all going to be in one place eventually, which they're now, really, but we're building on it. Thanks so much for everybody who tuned into the special last week, which was about the 1989 animal rights debate, which has been rediscovered in full. That was a good session, and if you haven't seen that one, it'd be worth looking at the recording because it's a really quite interesting kind of document in the sense that it was quite a formal debate. It wasn't exactly kind of you know, Oxford or Cambridge, but it was a formal debate which you don't tend to see nowadays. So it is quite interesting. Right, in terms of today, then. I've entitled this, When Did the Vegan Movement Stop Being Terrified of the Word Vegan? Which sounds a little bit odd, but we're going to kind of explore this idea of the move towards the acceptance of the word within the vegan movement, which again sounds a bit strange, but we'll see how that pans out in the coming minutes. The timeline, we're going to enter our tunnel in 1990 and come out in actual fact in the present day. So it's a long time tunnel in that sense. Now, generally speaking, we live in a time when many people, many activists would say that the moral baseline of the animal liberation movement is veganism. We might simply say that veganism is our movement's moral baseline. We might say that it's central to everything that we do as a movement, and we might say it's pretty much central to everything that we say as a movement. Didn't used to be like that, of course, but this is what the time tunnel is about, in a sense. So in terms of the word vegan, we're used to seeing it virtually everywhere now. It's on the web, it's on websites, we see it on street billboards, we see it on restaurants and cafe menus, and we see it in supermarkets. So the word vegan seems to be everywhere now. And as I said, it wasn't always like this. In fact, there are some modern day animal activists who claim that veganism should not be the moral baseline of our movement, but activism should be. So some have argued that we should decenter the word vegan within the vegan movement, or actually refrain from using it at all. a prominent activist group a few years ago called for a boycott of the word. So this time tunnel is slightly different from that in the sense that it's about a related issue, which is slightly different, which is when did the movement stop being frightened of the word? But it's also got another couple of kind of sub-questions, which are, is it fully not frightened of the word now, which is quite interesting? And also, is it true that there seems to be some resistance or some wariness of presenting in the vegan movement a consistent vegan message? So that's our kind of menu, if you like, for today. And so that's, in fact, is our time tunnel. Yeah, so I remember to do the title. So I just want to make a clarification at the start here, which is that this time tunnel is not designed to be an attack on any individual or any group. The idea is for it to be descriptive of the changes that have occurred over the years in terms of, you know, what we now recognize as the vegan movement and what we now recognize as the claims that the vegan movement makes, essentially. Because it's not that long ago when the animal movement would say virtually anything other than the word vegan. And so the question is why? And that's because until very recently, a lot of professionals and writers and strategists in the movement, they all claimed that veganism was a scare word, which was sometimes best avoided and certainly for most downplayed. And so that was the situation until relatively recently in the movement. One strategist, for example, argued that, well, in perhaps another 20 years or so, it might be safe to use the word vegan, but not now. For now, he said, we should recognize that we're in a pre-vegan world and act accordingly. Now, of course, from my point of view, and looking at the history of the vegan social movement, this flies in the face of Donald Watson's idea, which he presented in his very first bulletin for the movement in November 1944, that we need to ripen people up to new ideas. We you know, they're not going to just kind of fall over them. You know, we've got to present new ideas. So the more we avoid using the word that we want to, that's a bad thing from Watson's point of view. For some strategies, it's a good thing, but we'll see. Even the groups of the 1990s who used the word vegan in their organizations' names, they came to regret it. So an example of that is Vegan Outreach. Vegan Outreach came into being in 1990, and it was called Animal Liberation Action at the time. And they came to specialize in giving pamphlets out to college and university students in the main. Around 1994, they had a pamphlet entitled Vegetarianism. And then not long after that, they had another one called Justice for All, which I found an intriguing title, because I don't know whether that was, as it were, an intersectional message. I've never seen that pamphlet. So if anybody got one, I'd love to see that. So the Justice for All pamphlet, this did talk about veganism for the first time, but it presented veganism as a diet. What we'll see in the coming while is the fact that this is a repeated thing, that when the groups and the movement started to accept the word and started to use the word, it was almost exclusively presented as a diet at first. And there's still a lot of that going on. So that's a problem in my eyes. In 1995, this group changed its name then to Vegan Outreach. However, one of the co-founders of Vegan Outreach came to regret using the word vegan in their name, and fairly kind of early on, if you like. So this is an AR Zone, Animal Rights Zone interview with Matt Ball and this is 2011. So Ball was asked if he would call Vegan Outreach the same if he began it all again. And he basically answered that he wouldn't do. He said that within a decade of 1995, they regretted using the word. The word vegan hurts us, he said. And it was about money. He said that animal-friendly foundations and rich non-vegans didn't like the word vegan, and so therefore they wouldn't fund something called vegan, and so therefore their income was adversely affected by actually standing up and calling themselves their own philosophy, essentially. Vegetarian and welfare corporations had a much better chance of being funded. Now, since then, Matt Ball has abandoned veganism as a campaigning idea altogether, and he started something which is still online called One Step for Animals, and that was started in about 2016. I don't know if you've ever seen any of that, but their first video, which they've now since taken down, was essentially Matt Ball attacking veganism, calling vegans equivalent to Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, saying that vegans were rude. And so he's come up with this idea of One Step for Animals, which are basically asking people to do one thing, which is not to eat chickens. So it goes from Vegan Outreach to don't eat chickens, is his personal journey. So you could say then that that's less than a promising start in the United States, at least. So what about Britain? Now, this is Robin Lane. Robin Lane was the ALF press officer after Ronnie Lee. And this is his 2010 Animal Rights Zone interview. So Robin was part of the Vegan Society ruling council for a while. And in 1996, there was a proposal put to the council of the Vegan Society that an annual vegan event should be initiated. So the Vegan Society membership were in favor, but the Vegan Society itself were hesitant on the basis of the cost of it and the energy that would be expended doing it and the staff who would be, as it were, employed organizing it. So this means then that the very first proposal for the very first national vegan event in Britain was turned down by the Vegan Society. Now, Robin was running a grassroots group at the time called CARF, which stands for Campaign Against Leather and Fur. And so they decided to develop the idea instead of the Vegan Society. And so by 1998, they'd got themselves all set up, and the first national vegan festival occurs, run by CARF, but with some support from the Vegan Society. By 2004, which is only 19 years ago, this event becomes the London Vegan Festival, because other festivals now were springing up in the regions of Britain. So that was what was going on. Now, these other events, we probably know, are often under the name of Veg Fest rather than Vegan Festival. So that was then, and it still is kind of now to that extent. So turning to the publications put out by the grassroots of the movement, this is Ark News, and this is from 1996. Now, Ark News was put together and distributed by an old friend of mine called Neil Lee, and Neil will be the subject of a time tunnel to come. So it was just like a very small kind of A5 booklet. It was kind of zine style, if you like, just photocopied, very kind of rough and ready. The production values weren't great, but it was really just a bulletin to kind of G people up and get them going. And part of it was always this animal rights calendar, which was produced by a group called Veggies, which were and still are, I think, in Nottingham. So it's not easy to read, but I'm going to just pick out the bits that are there, in the sense that They're advertising a massed vegetarian rally for the activists. And then on another page, they're talking about a National Vegetarian Week. So in the grassroots, they were still following the lead of a lot of the national groups and focusing on vegetarianism rather than veganism. The good thing about the grassroots, though, is that they were the ones who were the quickest and most likely to talk about veganism. So that was a good thing. And here's an example of that. So this is Archangel. Archangel was a very well-produced kind of booklet, very supportive of direct action. This again is 1999, and they're advertising the second National Vegan Festival in that. If we turn to the more professional national groups in Britain, this is Viva. Now, Viva's name is interesting in the sense that Viva stands for Vegetarian International Voice for Animals. And if you look to the left of the slide, that is 1998. To the right, it's year 2000. In fact, if you look at that blue kind of heading, that's part of their document, which has a really long interview with Paul McCartney. Linda McCartney had died by then, but they called Paul and Linda McCartney the voice of vegetarianism. And it's interesting because McCartney says in the interview that his son James is the only one of the family who is vegan. And he says, I know that I should be, but I just can never kind of get there. And in more subsequent interviews, he said that Stella went vegan. But, and the same thing, Stella said to Paul, you should go vegan, but he's never been able to make it, really. Right. So to the right, the top square is about pig slaughter and animal welfare. The insert at the bottom is the last message from that piece. And this is where Viva are offering veggie packs for the audience. Bottom right marks the time in 2000 when vegan recipes were getting more attention. So I'm about to lose my voice, I think. Sadly, as I kind of suggested, veganism as a philosophy is never discussed. This was a long period when vegan offered vegetarian starter kits as well as vegan ones. Help, what's going on with my voice here? I'm losing it, bad start. Hang on a second. I'm doing a Ronnie Lee. Ronnie lost his voice on a Still Alive about a month ago. And he soldiered through, so I'm going to try. I think I'll just try and speak a little bit lower, see if that helps. Okay, so this is where we see the name again, Vegetarian International Voice for Animals. Now, again, this now is 2012. This is only 11 years ago. So they've still got the name, and they're still promoting vegetarianism. And then if you look at Company's House, as it were, this is their journey towards, or their evolution towards veganism. It seems that their first name was Viva, then Vegetarian International Voice for Animals, then it progressed to the Vegetarian and Vegan Foundation, and then it's now called the Vegan Viva, the Vegan Foundation, as far as I'm aware. Now, again, this is not to kind of pick them out and go, you know, bad people here. This is to show the evolution of these ideas that, first of all, in the movement, but not that long ago, it was always about vegetarianism. And then they started to become a mix and a match between the two ideas. And now, in the last few years, there's been this acceptance of the word vegan and much more of a focus on it. Again, with the caveat that most of it is still based on presenting it as a diet, which is a real shame. This is Animal Aid. Animal Aid has been described as Britain's first animal rights group when it was formed in 1977 by somebody called Jean Pink. I think Jean Pink is almost like a forgotten name in the movement now. So 24 years ago, Animal Aid were all about their veggie months, or the veggie months that was going on, and they were featuring a bunch of British vegetarian celebrities. When it came to their feature on world hunger or food security issues, which are long-term vegan campaigns and concerns, they offered a vegetarian solution. This is 2006, which is 17 years ago. So Veggie Month is still heavily promoted. But this again is where we start to see now the mix and match. So you're getting vegetarian stuff and vegan stuff in the same publication being featured. This is actually someone called Claudia Tarry urging Animal Aid members to try a vegan diet. And she says this, if you took to the streets and asked people to list words they associate with vegans, the responses are likely to be derogatory, difficult, boring. See if you recognize yourself in this, people. Pasty-faced, preachy, weird, the nut roast and lentils brigade. So that dates it in the sense that this is before the big rise in the vegan meats and everything. If you told them that vegans are often enthusiastic about food, have healthy appetites, and a passion for gooey desserts, creamy sauces, and the occasional not so healthy fry-up, they probably wouldn't believe you. And then the next line of the bit that I won't read, but it starts, there are 3 reasons for adopting a vegan diet. So again, this is very typical of the period. So when the national groups became brave enough to mention the word vegan, or talk about veganism, the philosophy is not presented as such. It's always presented as a diet, which is a real kind of shame. Because the current definition, the one that we now regard as the official definition of veganism, was developed between 18 and 27 years before 2006. So it was decades before this publication. And of course, the first 4 words of the official definition marks veganism out as a philosophy. Veganism is a philosophy. That's the first 4 words. And yet, that's not what gets covered. It's the dietary aspects of it, which is, as I said, a real kind of shame about it. Dropping back to the 1999 booklet for a moment, Animal Aid were much more willing to feature veganism on their youth pages. So they would use the word much more openly on their youth pages. I don't know, presumably seeing some kind of difference between the adult members and their youth members. But yet again, the caveat again is initially, at least, always presented as a diet. In fact, in this, you can't really read it. It's very small, but here they do talk about calf separation. Is one thing that is mentioned, but they also give a warning that, quote, being vegan can be more difficult than going veggie. And so again, there was quite a lot of that kind of rhetoric in the movement as well. Now, this is interesting. This is from 2012. In fact, I messaged the person who presented this in Dublin in 2012, just to check the date. So this is an Animal Aid school talks package. So essentially, it's guidelines for people who are hoping to do talks on behalf of Animal Aid. And the title is Guidelines for Talks on Vegetarianism, 2012. The guide advises Animal Aid school speakers to tell students the definition of vegetarian and of a vegetarian and vegan diet. And so it just goes, tell the students the definitions of a vegetarian and vegan diet. Vegetarians don't eat the flesh of animals, and then there's there's talk about lacto-vegetarians and so forth, ovo-lacto-vegetarians and everything else, which was more popular in the United States than it was in Britain, funnily enough. But then you've got 1.5 lines about veganism. Vegans avoid eating all animal products such as meat, fish, eggs, dairy products, milk, cheese, and yogurt, and honey. Now, apart from that 1 and a bit line on veganism, the rest of this entire document is entirely focused on vegetarianism. And so this is the kind of like little kind of outline of what you get in the document, which I've got right here. So you've got this definition thing, and then you've got all the stuff about vegetarian diets. And so again, even well into the 21st century, we've still got this reluctance to really talk very much about veganism. So what have we got here? Creating all those terms for types of vegetarians. Yes, well, as I said, it was very popular in the States, you know, to actually describe yourself as, oh, well, I'm an ovo vegetarian, I'm a lacto, and then you got lacto ovo vegetarians, and that's when some people started using the word pescatarian as well. So it became a bit of a thing to start breaking vegetarian into its own little camps in a way. So this is academia then. We're going to turn to how things have been in academia, and we would hope, wouldn't we, that things would be better within the academic world. So this is Gary Francione and Anna Charlton. They ran the Rutgers University Animal Rights Law Center. I think sometimes they call it a clinic. So this is a 1996 document on animal rights and the left. And the one to the right, the New Left Review there that you can see, that's Benton and Redfern on the same topic. And it was quite interesting, really, because in the 1990s, talking about the animal rights movement as a leftist movement wasn't controversial whatsoever. And so Francione is reporting on his own attending a lecture and then going for dinner with the leftist speaker, as it were. Francione chooses the vegetarian option and the lecturer eats flesh. And so this lecturer then notices that Francione's plate is flesh free and asks him, you know, are you still a vegetarian? And Francione writes this: being asked about being a vegetarian legitimizes at least a polite inquiry about being a non-vegetarian. So I answered his question, yes, I am still very much a vegetarian. Now, this is the point of this in terms of then and now, because Gary Francione went vegan in 1982 when he'd read a book called Fettered Kingdoms by John Bryant, which I've mentioned before, I'm sure. So yeah, this is 1996. So this is 14 years after going vegan, where he's still self-identifying as a vegetarian. Now, think about that in terms of the modern movement now. It's just not something that we would do, you know, which is really quite interesting. Turning to academic books, the left is Francione's excellent book, actually, Rain Without Thunder. And that is the same year as the Law Center commentary that we've just seen. Now, in Rain, there is no mention of veganism at all. To the right is the intro to animal rights. Now, that's 2000. This is 23 years ago. Again, there's no mention of veganism in this book. Which brings me to Dada Funfair, or Fanfare. My friend Melanie Joy, now this is 2010, 13 years ago. Now, this is the book that introduced the movement to the vegetarian concept of carnism. And now this is part of the index, and there's no mention of veganism, but there are several mentions of vegetarianism. And then on one particular page, this is 131, if anybody wants to check. This is Melanie Joy talking about vegans. She describes vegans as pure vegetarians. She says she observes that vegans tend to be less disgusted by eggs and dairy products than they are by meat, as she calls flesh. And then she comes up with what she thinks is the reason for this. Canadian Vegan Forever, how is it possible? No mention of veganism in an animal rights book. Yes, well, quite. I mean, well put. I mean, it's a pertinent question. And also, we're talking about this century now. We're talking about this century. We do get some claims in the movement that we've been doing vegan education, and veganism has been the thing for decades and decades and decades, and it's been a failure. And part of this presentation is to show that that is not true. In some senses, in terms of veganism being so central as it is now, it's only just beginning. So that's one message that I'm hoping to get over. So she's coming up with the reason for why she thinks that vegans are less disgusted by eggs and dairy. And she said it's because it's possible to obtain eggs and dairy without violence, she says. And therefore, because of that, it's less offensive, and because of that, it's less disgusting. Now, vegans consume a plant diet, not because they're personally offended or disgusted by anything. They do it because they want to oppose and boycott animal exploitation and animal rights violations. It's nothing to do with disgust and offense. So, obviously, I mean, I've said this before plenty of times now, in the sense that it is a favorite concept within the vegan movement, carnism. Whereas I tend to think that it's a dangerous thing to promote. And so the question then is, well, why is it dangerous to promote that? And I think that is because if any curious person was to Google or search on another search engine the word carnism, they would be directed to Dr. Melanie Joy, because she coined the word, and then to her organization like Pro-Veg. Not your bun, not milk, absolutely. Only just beginning. Yes, it's almost like a shock, really, isn't it? The fact that, I mean, I've been vegan 44 years, and yet veganism wasn't part of that very much. And Ronnie and I look back and think, how could that be? But it was. That this is the history of the movement that we lived through. So you've got Dr. Joy and her Pro-Veg organization, in which there are her close colleagues, her husband, Sebastian Joy, and also Tobias Leonhardt, sometimes known as the vegan strategist. So what nonsense will our vegan curious inquirer get if they ended up with Leonhardt through, trying to find out what carnism is about? So I got a few examples of it. This is the first. On the vegan movement, it's a relatively young movement. It's about food. Now, to me, the kind of food-only vegans are as bad as the animals-only vegans, in the sense that they seem determined to slim down the meaning of veganism to every possible extent. And so whether you're going to classify it as a diet, or if you say it's only about other animals, then that is not giving the expansive version of what veganism actually was, the people who started the movement. Defining veganism as the total avoidance of animal products, always and everywhere, sets the bar unnecessarily high for non-vegans. So the strategy really boils down to, if the movement wasn't really vegan, it would help veganism as an idea, because that means then that vegans would be more plentiful and the vegan movement would be bigger. Essentially what it meant was that Tobias Leonhardt wanted the vegan movement to revert back to being the vegetarian movement. That's essentially what he was getting at. If we would say that veganism meant that 2 times a year, I'm just inventing something, you could eat non-vegan stuff and you still call yourself a vegan, is it possible that a lot of people, it would be a lot more attractive? Okay, so that was another part of it. There's people who say, like, we should always and every moment be open from the beginning about what we are doing. It should be clear that vegan is the end goal. I don't know why they say that. I don't understand that. And then the one that usually gets vegans a little bit agitated is this one. Someone who eats fish or sometimes a cookie with an egg is still a vegan in my eyes. So that to me is rather the danger of vegans employing the vegetarian concept of carnism. Okay, we turn to the States in a way, although we're going to come back to the British version of PETA. So this is People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, of course. They featured Paul McCartney for years and years and years. So the first one is Paul and Linda. So we're going back into the 1990s. And then the more recent one is much more recent, of course. And again, whenever they feature McCartney, then they have to talk about vegetarianism rather than veganism, because he himself is not a vegan. Some of their controversial, I've got a whole bunch of these, and I actually slimmed them all down. So I've only got a few examples now, because I thought there's no point in showing everything. These are the kind of ableist adverts. First of all, you've got the kind of fat shaming on the left there, the man and the big belly type of thing. And then the one that caused a lot of trouble was Save the Whales, Lose the Blubber, Go Vegetarian, which was out a few years ago, and that was a big banner. Morrissey there wants people to go vegetarian. I believe in recent years there's reports that Morrissey has finally gone vegan, but I'm not sure. Rise Against is a straight edge band, which always intrigues me. There's apparently 3 of their members are straight edge, and straight edge is usually associated with veganism, but there is a kind of vegetarian kind of version of straight edge, and so they seem to be in that one. So when you see PETA featuring Rise Against, it tends to be a vegetarian thing rather than a vegan one. Again, now this one is interesting. This one indicates some residual doubts, I think, in the national groups about the use of veganism. Chicks Love a Vegetarian. So this is an actor, I believe, for PETA. Now, this is 2019. This is 2019 when this was out. So that, again, is quite shocking in terms of the timeline, I think. These are, if you can see it, might be more difficult to see it, I'm not quite sure. These are pages currently from the PETA site in Britain. And so they're talking about vegetarians and vegans, mix and match. And then there's a whole bunch of pages where they go through different age groups, but it's always the same, following the same idea of vegetarian and vegan. This is Mercy for Animals, and this is currently again. So they're talking about pro-vegetarian videos in that. And so again, I think that what this is indicating really is that even now, right now, there's still some wariness in some of the national groups about veganism. And so again, this idea of presenting a strong, consistent vegan message is kind of lost, on people. So that's a bit of a shame. This is Animal Equality. This is now. They have almost all their focus is on factory farming and also on flesh reduction campaigns. And you see at the bottom, Visit Veg, Love Veg, which is their kind of recipe website. Now, most of the national groups, to give them credit, have got, CR Vegan Starter Kit or CR Vegan Recipes. Animal Equality have decided to keep with the word veg. Again, there's no real explanation here of the strong philosophical side of veganism. There's much more about talking about the diet aspects of it, which is, you know, pretty upsetting, really. Now, these are possibly some indications of where this awareness is coming from, in the sense that this is the last few years, and these are grants that Animal Equality have got. And so in the last few years, say about 6 years, they've spent almost $11 million on animal welfare campaigns. These are kind of cage-free promotion, welfare-related campaigning. Now, it's interesting here because they get their grants from something called the Open Philanthropy Project. Now, what they might say, as an echo to what Matt Ball said, is that, yeah, but this project wouldn't give us money for vegan things. So if we want a lot of money off somebody, then we've got to extract the vegan. That's what they might say. A bigger set of grants is this one. This is Mercy for Animals. So they've spent 25 million plus on their corporate welfare campaigns, as they call it. The last grant was $12 million. And so again, I don't actually know. It's really interesting because when I talk to vegans about this, they tend not to know any of this. So I don't know whether this is something to do with the algorithms, the internet algorithms, but vegans tend to be shielders from this information, if you like. And so they don't know. But essentially, there's this thing about we're not committed to go fully vegan. And this is right now for some of the national groups. So for some critics of the movement, like the Gary Francione counter movement, for example, that shows that we don't really have a vegan movement in his view, because veganism is almost presented as one option you can take rather than the ethical option that is required. So that would be the big kind of problem from Francione's point of view. So if you ever see a Gary Francione video or meme and he's saying there isn't an animal rights movement or there isn't a vegan movement, that's what he means. That our movement doesn't present a consistent, strong vegan message all the time. And going back to Leonard, he doesn't even understand why you would. So there you go. Right, some good news. So we're coming up to the actual vegan campaigns now. These are pretty much 100% vegan-based campaigns. And again, it's interesting now to just note the dates that we're talking about. Earthlings Experience came into being in 2015. So that was well before AV, which was, sorry, I got that wrong. 2005 came into being in 2005. AV came into being in 2016. Now, one thing that people don't know about the Earthling Experience is kind of how big it was and how widespread it had become. It had a very kind of DIY element to it, but these are all the kind of chapters or groups, for example. I always have a smile because they've included the Dublin group, which I was a member of, in the UK column, which won't go down well with the membership. So I tend not to tell them. So, you know, if you're watching people in Dublin, don't watch this bit. So yeah, so it's always been a very kind of DIY culture, really, Earthling Experience, and it's summed up with the slogan, which was on that first page. All you need is a laptop, a mask, and a public space. So it was very kind of not lackadaisical, but it was kind of loose. And it meant that people would bring their own laptops. You just get together, do your own thing. And my experience of the Earthling Experience was really good. You get as much in engagement as the so-called professional groups as well. This one goes to modern day, that as we will know the movement now. So AV, as I said, 2016. I couldn't find out We the Free. Now, We the Free is pretty recent. Somebody in the comments is almost bound to know when We the Free started, but it was only a few years ago, maybe, I don't know, 3-4, is it? And then the other one is the Animal Save movement, which is interesting because that's 2010. So that's actually a lot older than I would have imagined. But then it was called Toronto Animal Save, I believe. And so I'm not quite sure when it moved to, the kind of international kind of global thing. I'm not quite sure. And then finally on this is 2015, and this is Go Vegan Island. So what we now understand as Go Vegan World, which are these images, started life in 2015 as Go Vegan Island, and then they became Go Vegan World in 2016. And a lot of people will have seen their huge billboards around about the place. They tend to do the big kind of motorway type billboards, the ones in the city centres, but they also do things like adverts on buses and that kind of stuff and all that, and smaller adverts inside the buses or inside trams, that kind of thing. So it seems then that there's much more evidence, if you like, that we've moved now to a time where many more of even the bigger, well-known international organizations are taking a pretty firm vegan line. It's just interesting that we've still got some residual kind of wariness in the movement. I suppose it's good that the newer influencers tend to be strict on veganism, although there are some that are trying to slim vegan down to be some kind of militant version of the RSPCA, but there are some others. Getting commentary now from the cat. So so that's your time tunnel, really. So have I missed any questions? Is the question, or I got time for a couple if you want to sling them up now. But as a relatively long-term vegan myself, I find it difficult to get over to relatively new vegans this story of the newness of it. They come into a movement and they just see what is, but it's not been there very long. It's only just started. So again, with that kind of caveat, if anyone tells you that we've been doing vegan education for many decades and it's not been a success, they're frankly not telling you the truth, because we're literally only just starting. In historical terms, this is a new thing within our own movement. Even though we call it the vegan movement, it's is mainly focused on vegetarianism, and then you've got that mix and match, but then you've got the big focus on dietary aspects. So in terms of an unequivocal, strong vegan message, which is consistent and all the time, we really are at the beginning of that. And so it can't be true that we've been doing this for decades and decades and it's not worked. It just physically can't be a valid thing to say. Right. Okay, people. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I shall see you next time when we shall do another vegan time tunnel. Thanks very much. Hello, 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 hello. Welcome, everyone. So, how you doing? Yeah, so we're at it again. So, welcome along to number one of the second series of the Vegan Time Tunnel. You're more than welcome, and I hope you can join me in the next few weeks so we can put together this kind of bit of an archive, really. And so, yeah, the Vegan Time Tunnel. So Bernie V, if you're here, cover your ears. I hope that wasn't too painful for Bernie. Said that it was a bit thick, so I have actually lowered the level on that little bit. So hopefully from now on, it's going to meet with your approval. So hello, Michael, Jeremy the Ape, the Vegan Review. Oh yeah, that's me. BC, hi. Canadian Vegan Forever. Hello. The Stupid Vegan. Hello. And Deb. Hello. So people are coming in as we speak. So that's good and nice. Now, okay. So I've called this a British anti-vivisection movement. I know I said on the advertising vivisection, we're going to go into very, very briefly the kind of history of all that. And I called it Decline, Radicalization, Decline and Rebirth, ? And so it's interesting the kind of interplay between anti-vivisectionism and veganism, at least if you like, towards the end. Now, vivisection is a contested phrase in the first place. We could say, well, do we do a Donald Watson and say, well, people need to be ripened up to this word? Or do we think, well, it'd be easier to talk about things like animal testing and animal experimentation on this? I mean, people like Joan Danaher is very strong on the idea that we must say vivisection. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe the visceral kind of part of the word, maybe. And also, vivisection is a bit misleading nowadays because obviously vivisection is the companion piece to dissection. And so the difference between living and being dead already kind of thing. So we talk about cutting while alive. That's what vivisection kind of means. And so, so in that sense, it could be that the animal testing, which is a bit weak maybe, but animal experimentation. My sister once said that she thought that people might have a problem with the word experimentation. But again, so maybe people could put in the chat, what would you say if you were going to talk about vivisection? Would you use that term, or would you use animal testing? Would you use, animal research, or what? Animal experimentation. Be interesting to see, because this is the Vegan Time Tunnel Interactive. Now we've got a lot to get through today, and so I'm hoping to keep my eye on the chat. So I will be looking at that. So we've got a lot to do, and now I've also called it the British anti-vivisection movement. So that's one limitation of this story, right? In fact, I'm only be talking about Britain, and also mainly about the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection, which is now called Cruelty Free International. Excuse me. So that's one of the things. And the focus on the BUAV is on its radicalization. So that's the early 1980s, and then the decline of the anti-vivisection movement in general, and then, as I said, the kind of rebirth. I haven't been coughing all day. It's typical, isn't it? So, hang on, somebody's trying to ring me. I'm just going to get rid of that. Oh dear. It's a good start. So mainly about the BUAV, the radicalization and everything. Now, the time span, though, of this, we're talking about the 2nd century before the Common Era to the present day. So we've got quite a lot to get through. So I suppose we better get going. These are the main resources that I'm using, the main ones, not all of them, but the main ones. So Growl by Kim Stallwood. Now, I played a very, very small part in the BUAV's radicalization in the early 80s, whereas Kim was a central player, a prime mover, as we say. Oh yeah, there's one. Maybe extreme animal torture would be another phrase that we could use. Although again, vivisectors will probably point to certain things that don't seem like that, well, anyway, let's not get into that. So yeah, then also the Norm Phelps' book, The Longest Struggle, and then Slaughter of the Innocent. Now, a general apology that I know that people watching this on the phone are gonna they're gonna struggle with seeing some of the slides. So apologies for that. There's not much I can do about it. What I will do for some of them is I'll go full screen, but that's not really going to help you too much. But not too much I can do about that. But for one thing that you probably can't see is that little blurb at the bottom of the Hans Royce book, Slaughter of the Innocent, which came out in 1979. And it's by Spike Milligan, my kind of comic hero, if you like. A voice for the innocent of the animal world who, in the majority of cases, are dying painful deaths at the hands of a creature called Homo sapiens, who has time and time again proved he is not worth it. So there's a bit of Milligan for you, or Spike Maligna, the well-known typing error. So there we go. Okay, so anti-vivisectionist Ray Greek, I've not used much from him actually, says that people began researching on humans, usually convicted prisoners and other animals, from around the third century before the Common Era, but many point to a century before that, and in particular to Claudius Galenus, who is more commonly known as Galen. And some say that the reason he used other animals is because he wasn't allowed to use humans. It was kind of against the law. So that could be true. And in fact, he became a physician in Rome, and he became the doctor to the gladiators. So that's an interesting one. I think that might actually be one way that he could have a lot of contact with humans to do that, on the grounds that he's not allowed to research on them. And he is also the physician to 5 emperors. So he was known as the father of vivisection in many kind of histories. But his work was strewn with errors precisely because he researched mainly on other animals. So he made a lot of anatomical mistakes. For example, he thought that fruit was bad for humans, but he also thought that pus was good for us. So Royce is saying that Galen's teaching were disastrous for humanity. As I said, he made a lot of mistakes, but he was defended by the Catholic Church for a long, long time. And so that meant going against him was a dangerous thing to do. And so the mistakes that he made were, as it were, protected. Yeah, Michael, that's well, actually, funny enough, there are some websites that say that Galen was a genius, medical genius and this kind of stuff. So you do get different versions of that, but certainly in terms of his mistakes, he made a lot of them, and they kind of, as it were, because he was protected, lasted for a long time. Then, just to bring things up to date, or at least move things along very quickly, we've got René Descartes from the 1600s and Claude Bernard from the 1800s. And Bernard in particular is seen as the father of the scientific method that is still used, so seen as a major kind of player in this story. So now we move to where we're supposed to be, which is the opposition to vivisection, and that is said to date from Victorian Britain. So we talked about 1837 through to 1901. So really, this is where the story really starts, if you like, which is a throwback to Spike Milligan. He used to, about 20 minutes into the Goon shows, he used to have an announcement saying, "So, folks, this is where the story really starts," even though it was kind of more than halfway through. Norm Phelps said that nothing really happened until Francis Power Cobb exploded onto the scene in 1863. So that's Power Cobb to the right. Looks like a formidable person, not to mince with, I imagine. And of course, Cobb is famous for her feminist writings, as well as their anti-vivisection work. Probably anti-slavery too. There's a lot of intertwining this time in those issues. The one thing that she wasn't was a vegetarian. A lot of them were vegetarian. You know, George Bernard Shaw. You know, they kind of stood for against everything, if you like. Kim Stallwood said, in fact, that the abolitionist versus the reformist disputes flared up almost immediately in the anti-vivisection movement. And in fact, I suppose Cobb was central to that. I mean, she actually left some groups, started others, precisely because they kind of moderated their opinion. She was Dublin County born, so she was born in Ireland, and she began the Victoria Street Society for the Protection of Animals from Vivisection, which is a pretty neat but very long name. This is 1875, and then the BUAV in 1898. And so that marks the difference. She actually moved from the one to the other because the Victoria Street Society kind of moderated and she wasn't having any of that. So she formed the BUAV, and that included abolition in its name, kind of on purpose, the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. Of course, it's now been changed to a weaker name, which is Cruelty Free International. And in fact, their history of their own group is a little bit confused. For example, they do mention that they were formed in 1898, but then they say that they changed their name to the BUAV in about 1947, I think it said. So there's a couple of mistakes there, I think. Also, the Little Brown Dog affair, that is part of this story, the vivisection story. But we're not going to go into it today because I've got a time tunnel all about that coming up. So that will have to suffice for later on. Interesting. Kim Stallwood talks about the old brown dog. He says that as the story of the old brown dog illustrates, the 2 decades immediately prior to World War I were a high point for agitation surrounding vegetarianism, anti-vivisectionism, and social progress in Britain. So that's pretty interesting. So we've got the formation of the anti-vivisection groups, as we said. As we move forward, Cobb is replaced by Dr. Walter Hadwin. Now, when I was getting involved, I knew the Hadwin Trust, Dr. Hadwin Trust. That was one of the 2 big kind of alternatives kind of group, along with the Dowding Fund for medical research. So it was the BUAV that started the Hadwin Trust in 1970. One thing I didn't know about Hadwin is that he was charged with manslaughter because a girl he was treating died of tonsillitis. I didn't know that, but in the subsequent trial, he was found not guilty. But Kim Stallwood rightly comments that didn't do his reputation much good, though, in that sense. And also, he makes a comment about the fact that the anti-vivisection movement at this time had links to campaigns against vaccination and also for women's suffrage. So we could be going right back to Cobb there. Now, interestingly, Kim says both of which made the organization vulnerable to attacks from its enemies for being at once anti-science and secondly too radical. So I can understand why the enemies of the group would say that, but I'm not quite sure if I buy that analysis of it. The BUAV had a publication, and so this is coming up to where I start to kind of register what's going on, called Animal Welfare. Kim says tellingly it was called Animal Welfare. In the 1950s, the BUAV they had a first campaign against Porton Down. So we're gonna talk about Porton Down a little bit later, but that's a secret experiment place in Wiltshire. It involved chemical and biological weapons, and as you'll see, it's very kind of James Bond and still there to this day. The BUAV also talked about the experimental other animals who were being sent into space at the time. So Kim also says that by the time we get to the 60s and 70s, things are slow in these days, as you can imagine, pre-internet and all that. The BUAV began to respond to the government's early interest, as he puts it, in revising the 1876 Cruelty to Animals Act, which is to the left. I appreciate that nobody can probably see that, let alone people on the phone. And they responded to that by handing in a petition of 300,000 people to Downing Street in order to support, calls for reform and modernization of this act that kind of nobody likes. So the Cruelty to Animals Act is the legislation that regulates overseas vivisection. So it's replaced 100 years later by the 1986 Animals Scientific Procedures Act. So we were very involved with that because I was very involved with the BUAV at the time. And it was a piece of legislation that it seemed to be something that the anti-vivisectionists would welcome because it was a chance to update and improve the existing legislation. But it was also seen ultimately as a vivisector's charter. That's what Animal Aid called it. And so all the anti-vivisectionists now say that it was a dreadful piece of legislation and a terrible kind of missed opportunity. Now, in this book, this is Peter Singer's In Defense of Animals. That's the first edition. Kim said that, and that was 1985, he says that the most abolitionists of all the anti-vivisection groups, in other words, the BUAV, had by the 1980s become appallingly archaic and Dickensian. And then he kind of clarifies what he meant in his later book called Growl. And he says, by which I meant that although on paper the membership was around 4,000 individuals, it was hard to locate any active members. The head office didn't have any means, including leaflets, of promoting its ideas or the organization, which in turn meant that the BUAV did very little, if any, campaigning. So that is certainly true. It was kind of moribund. It was kind of like, it was just kind of dead in the water kind of thing. When the progressives moved into the BUAV after taking it over, we're talking about very early 80s now. I just remember going in and seeing this kind of their stock cupboard. It's like a broom cupboard, a little kind of cubby hole kind of thing. And the only thing I remember was a few books written by the director of the organization. I think there was a few copies of this animal welfare journal. And then there was lots of tea towels depicting the North Yorkshire town of Harrogate. So I'm not actually quite sure why all that happened. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. The Harrogate tea towels have always been a mystery. I've never got to the bottom of that. Right, so we're up to the 1970s and 80s then. So this is the context of what led to the radicalization of the BUAV. Progressives in the movement were casting their eyes on the RSPCA. And Kim said that organization was dominated by people who supported hunting. And they saw the main aim of the RSPCA as essentially stopping cruelty to cats and dogs. So the progressives set about doing something about the RSPCA. It's really interesting. In the press, the progressives are always called the Young Turks versus the Old Guard. That's usually the way it's put together. There's quite a few people in the kind of RSPCA reform group that we would know, like Richard Ryder. There's also Richard Corse, Dick Corse, he was called. He was a main player in the League Against Cruel Sports and various other people. And so it was another one where you had this other kind of stagnant organization and also one that promoted animal use. But then again, it was the RSPCA. So yeah, it did. There wasn't as much confusion about the RSPCA then than there is now. At the same time, it was still thought worthy of trying to improve it and actually get it to at least stand up to its name within its own remit, if you like. I remember, see, they got people to join. I think somebody paid for me to join the RSPCA at this time. And so I remember going to an EGM or an AGM, and it was in this swanky hotel in London. And I do remember the morning session where we voted that the Queen would be thrown out of being the RSPCA patron on the ground that she went shooting and hunting. And that motion passed. And then we went for a lunch break to be told that the RSPCA Council had reinstated the Queen as patron in the lunch break. So nothing much changed. Again, Young Turks and Old Guard. So Stallwood was kind of involved with this RSPCA reform thing, and he thought, well, I wonder whether this strategy would work with the BYV as well. And so he was well placed at this time, because a little earlier in 1978, he had, along with Faye Funnell, and Faye Funnell is the person who burnt the fur coat that I mentioned in the kind of intro to this new series. Faye Funnell and Angela Walder and Kim Stallwood, they co-founded the Coordinating Animal Welfare Group, which was called CORE. It was used as a kind of mobilization tool and a radicalization tool, if you like. Again, this is pre-internet, and so it was a networking idea. Now, Angela Walder later became the scientific advisor for the BYV after it had been radicalized. I remember a time when she told me that because she was an animal technician at one point, and so she used to have the job of taking the animals from the holding unit to the lab, and she said that the government inspectors wouldn't go into the animal house, and the reason for that is that they didn't want to get hairs on their suits. So that's how good the the inspections were. Anyway, back to CORE. So CORE, Coordinating Animal Welfare, despite the name, it was central to what we call animal rights in those days. It was pretty active. It was this coordinating group, as I said. It did the first public screening for the Animals film, for example. So we talk about 1981/82. It oversaw the closure of Club Row, which was a notorious animal market. That's going to come up in a little while. Had presentations from some of the big names in the movement at the time, like Clive Hollands. Clive Hollands was the president, I think it was, of the SSPV, the Scottish Society for the Prevention of Vivisection, one of the Scottish groups. Also, Richard Ryder gave talks, and philosopher Peter Singer as well. Did Tom Reagan talk, I hear you ask? I don't know. I don't think so. Also, at the CORE meetings, organizations would set up some stalls, which is to sell books and give out free information. And also, they would provide vegan-friendly food. And another thing they did was they coordinated the campaign to take over the BYV, or win control of the BYV, as Kim puts it. And in fact, Kim at this time was already working for the BYV. So this is a really weird thing, because he was essentially trying to take over or close down his own employers, right? And so they found out about it, and of course they weren't too happy, and said to Kim, well, look, if you chair another meeting of CORE, then you're out the door here, type of thing. And so for a couple of meetings, he sat outside the CORE meetings, just sat outside in the street. People would come out and tell him what was going on. And of course, the BYV people found out about that as well and weren't too happy again, and eventually kind of let him go, as I think is the phrase that people use nowadays. So we're up to early 1980s, and indeed the Young Turks do take control of the BYV's executive committee. I joined it in 1982. Kim Stallwood was rehired a year earlier, so we talk about January 1981, and became the BYV's campaign officer. Let me bring this back in. And Kim said, our revolution at BOAV sent shockwaves throughout the British animal rights movement and beyond, including the United States and Australia. Now, that, in my assessment, that is really accurate. It's difficult to overplay the effect that what was going on at the time. This was kind of real peak in stuff, but the BOAV's radicalization was a major part of it. And one reason for that is that for the first time, relatively radical people had access to quite a lot of money. You know, Animal Aid had started in 1977, and they were doing a lot of locally based stuff, a lot of leafleting and this kind of stuff. They used to specialize in giving leaflets out at the tube stations in London, for example, but they also had local contacts. So there was a kind of lot going on. The HSA were very busy. The ALF was very busy. They had the Animal Liberation Leagues, the regional groups as well. So a lot started happening. And the BOAV's radicalization was a lot to do with it, because they ended up being a really big coordinating thing and publicized everything in their magazine, which they started to call the Liberator. And they changed it from Animal Welfare to the Liberator. And it was a big, glossy, quite horrible looking thing. And then they made it into like a tabloid. So I've got some shots of that coming up. Now, I don't know what happened to the Harrogate tea towels, but they were quickly replaced by posters and leaflets, including fly posters. Now, the fly posters from the BOAV were pretty graphic, so I'm not going to show you them. I've actually got a couple of shots of them, but they're so small you can't really see them later. But I'm not going to show you them. I was a volunteer at the BOAV at this time. It was just before I became a committee member. And the fly posters, we kind of sent them everywhere. So I remember being in the office and we bundled together lots of the leaflets, all these fly posters, and we sent them to just about anybody we could think of who might put them up, you know, might do a little bit of fly posting. And in fact, that's what happened. We started to get lots and lots of photographs of these fly posters all over the country, and they ended up in the press. It caused a big stir. And then the BOAV got into trouble. I remember that, because I think they put their name at the bottom of the fly posters, and maybe even their address, maybe even have the phone number. And so a lot of the local councils started to threaten to sue them for either advertising space or kind of criminal damage, because, you know, obviously fly posting is on empty buildings, that kind of thing. So I do remember they had to reprint all the posters and take their name off them, and then they all went back up again. So that was pretty good. Now, in terms of things going on nationally, the BOAV became the main organizer for the World Day for Laboratory Animals, which is April the 24th. Now, this I'm a bit sketchy on the fine details of this, in the sense that I think the World Day might have existed before, and it might have initially been run by the National Anti-Vivisection Society, NAVS. But I think what Kim did, because he took over the organizing of it for 6 national demos, I think he either revitalized it or he might have actually come up with the idea. I'm not sure about that fine detail. Now, the first one that he organized was 1982, which drew a crowd of, well, people say between 5,000 and 6,000 people. And this involved walking 6 miles from a town in England called Salisbury through to Porton Down, where these warfare experiments go. I'm going to make that full screen. You see, it's very James Bond, isn't it? You see that picture of the lab, Britain's secret nerve gas lab. You know, very Thunderball, I think. And so it's still there, and it's still doing all kinds of horrendous things, as far as I'm aware. So that was the second time really that the BOAV had picked on Porton. So this is the Liberator, talking about the siege of Porton. So this is 1982, the big picture, the Liberator, and then the smaller pictures, they are from 1983, when some people returned to Porton Down, and they also stopped these trains. A bit of civil disobedience. The picture at the bottom, of course, is people, as it were, getting taken off the tracks. This is a shot of the storming of Portland grounds. There was a lot of talk about whether it was a good idea, in the sense that we talk about chemical and biological warfare experiments, but obviously you wouldn't get that far anyway, in a sense. Now, the largest of the demos that Kim Storwood organized involved 9,000 people, and 600 of those took part in this kind of elaborate street theatre, which was pretty good. What happened was, every 6 seconds a bell chimed, marking when one of the laboratory animals was killed. And they had some people dressed up as vivisectors who kind of came and grabbed one person from the crowd, and kind of executed them on the spot and left them lying there. So at the end of the 90 minutes or so, there was 600 people kind of dead, as it were. So it was quite a effective stunt, if you like. And although you can't see it too well, that Liberator, that picture actually is about that particular thing. It says 600 people die in Trafalgar Square. So that's what that one's talking about. The person giving a talk there is Jeremy Corbyn, who became the Labour leader, of course, in political terms. Okay. Now, what was I going to say? I was going to say something more about the. Oh yeah, really. Kim was talking about the achievements of the BYV, and they're not kind of great in a way. It said, for example, that they ignored the protests about the update, and they came out with this vivisectors charter and everything. But he said that it did lead to other things later, down the line. He says, for example, the British government subsequently banned the testing of cosmetics on other animals in 1997, and the LD50 toxicity test in 2001. The LD50 test is a pretty gruesome thing. In 2003, the European Union agreed to a membership-wide ban on cosmetic testing to happen 10 years later in 2013. So, as you can see there, you wouldn't put that down as massive kind of gains, but it's certainly, in terms of promoting what was going on, pretty good. So before we go into, as it were, the decline, I just want to go through a few slides showing some of the impact of what was going on in those days. So let's see what we've got. Now this is interesting because the merchandise for the new radicalized group were really good, and they were put together by a group called Animus. I used to go to Animus to get our badges and everything, because we started an animal rights shop in 1982, and we think it's the first animal rights shop in Britain at the time. So we used to get all the sales goods from all the big groups on sale or return, because we couldn't afford to actually get them in. And so we used to get this big range of T-shirts and sweatshirts and everything. There's badges there on the second row. The enameled badges, I think they were a hangover from the previous time. I think they must have found them in the office and everything. So then you got books. Is Tom Reagan's The Case for Animal Rights there, Roger? I hear you ask. No, it isn't. But Animal Liberation by Peter Singer is, of course, and a couple of scientific anti-vivisection books as well. But then again, we are talking about 1984 here, but the case was out by then. Then you got all the posters and leaflets, and you used to have to pay to get them in those days. But that's the way it went. Again, this is all pre-internet, so it was much more difficult to kind of pass things around in a way. But they were very, very kind of powerful resources. This every 6 seconds is really the kind of trademark slogan of the BYV, according to Kim Storwood, and it was everywhere, including kind of train stations and stuff. They had those big posters that you see now with Go Vegan World. They're big posters about it. They also had leaflets. This actually is an advert which was published in newspapers. When I was on the committee, we used to get a rundown of all the the advertising. Did we get any new members from this one? Did we get some new legacies? This kind of stuff. And they usually got put in the kind of more lefty kind of papers. It was usually a waste of time putting them in the kind of right-wing press. So we used to get quite a lot of members through actual kind of proper advertising, if you like. And so we used to use that general slogan every 6 seconds. Now, again, for the people with phones, there's no way you're gonna see this, but so I apologize for that. But this is a week of action. So this is the kind of galvanizing of the grassroots, which was part and parcel of the radicalization of the BOAV. So these are kind of a week of action, and these are all the photographs from all the stuff that's kind of going on around it. Oh yeah, well, I did want to say this is a shot from Scotland, and if you recall the posters and the badges and all that kind of stuff, it's actually very difficult to find posters and badges and everything which have got a lot of claims about cruelty back in those days. Like, for example, here, one of the main banners is "Animals have rights," right? And so that's kind of the main claims making at the time, if you like. And so you don't get the kind of same cruelty claims as you do in the modern movement. And I think it might be, and this is only me speculating, of course, it could be because at the time of the BOAV radicalization, it was a time when people were trying to do something about the RSPCA, but we knew full well what the RSPCA was, Traditional Animal Welfare Group. It wasn't, it wouldn't go near veganism with the barge pole. We know that. Whereas in the modern movement, I think there's some confusion about things like the RSPCA. And I think that's something to do with the prominence of the word cruelty in the modern movement, because they see prevention of cruelty to animals and think, veganism. Of course, it doesn't connect with the RSPCA. It's not to do with it. The Liberator to the right there, Horace Hazelton. So that was a group that I co-founded, the Hazelton Action Group. And we'll be talking about that in another time tunnel coming up. But this is just self-indulgence on my case. What we did was we broke in and retrieved quite a lot of paperwork about paraquat experiments that they were doing. Ended up in an anti-vivisection book, and on the front page of the Liberator and also the NAVS journals. I think Animal Aid covered it as well. So that was pretty good. And one of the first victories, I suppose, is Club Row Goes. So this is early '83 at this stage. So this notorious Victorian kind of market, kind of East End market, very kind of grubby place, did close down in the end. Problem with that, of course, is that it moved somewhere else. So this is, often a problem. You have a long-standing kind of, long-standing campaign, and then the target, as it were, moves elsewhere. This is, this is a bit of an attack on Charles River, another animal breeding place. Charles River used to, I don't know whether they do, but they used to own islands where they bred primates for research. I don't know whether they still do. And then this was the London Underground, and as you can see, it's another one of the BOAV big posters. Curiosity will kill this cat, but they also had the every 6 seconds one on there as well. And the guy in the picture is Mick Heslin, who was a kind of graphic designer for them, still active on Facebook. And he also accompanied me, or I accompanied him on the Orkney trip in terms of the Sea Shepherd. So that's going to be another time tunnel as well. So that's pretty good. Just a couple more Liberators. And again, if you want to actually read these, go to Talon Conspiracy, and you can find the full thing, and you can actually leaf through each and every one. Another March 8,000 this time. And then the BOAV prosecutes surgeons. Now, I don't know whether you can see that, probably not, but the vivisectors had tattooed the word crap on the monkey's forehead. So, yeah, that's what vivisectors are like, folks. Okay, now, so the decline, really, let's just drop this out for a second. So the decline of the BOAV, there was a lot of push to put animals into politics at one time. Now, Kim Stolde is really big on that. I tend not to go for it. I think we need cultural change first. There was something called GCAP and putting animals into politics. GCAP now, what was that? General Election Coordinating Committee for Animal Protection, I think it was. And they did a series of kind of general elections in Britain. And what they did was they would contact all the parties, first of all, try and get them to do something about animal welfare in their manifestos. And then kind of when that was done, they would then recommend to their membership who to vote for, essentially. So some of the activists weren't too pleased about that on the grounds that they thought that, action and campaigning was kind of more important than messing with the politicians. I mean, they'd also seen the start of the kind of campaign and lobbying that led to the hunting ban. So you ended up with the League Against Cruel Sports kind of taking MPs out for steak dinners and stuff. So it's very difficult from a kind of a vegan point of view. But of course, veganism wasn't the moral baseline of the movement at this time. Boots was an issue. When Ronnie and I were in prison, we got news that Boots, I think, had sued the BOAV, and I think they were ordered to pay £30,000 to Boots the vivisectors, and I think they agreed to do it, and we were opposed to it. We said, well, look, just close the BOAV down. It's just a name, it's just a group, and then once you've done that, just start it again with it. But they wouldn't do that. Then they changed a few things. For example, one of their taglines was against all animal experiments to reflect their abolitionist thing. And then that was changed to against animal experiments. So took the all bit out. And then they changed the name in full to Cruelty Free International as well. And then we have the difficult issue of the rise of vivisection as the moral baseline in the movement, which really is mainly just this century. But it really put anti-vivisection on the back foot, really. And so in that sense, yeah, it's, a lot of people kind of regret the fact that a lot of attention was given to veganism over animal experiments, whereas, well, there's an interesting chapter in one of Gary Franz Jones' books where he says that vivisection is a trickier question because it's the only part of animal use which is not transparently frivolous, right? So there is something in that, and I think me and Ronnie have talked about that on Staying Alive as well. So vivisection kind of, I mean, it still bubbled under really, but it kind of disappeared as veganism became the main thing that everybody started doing. Then vivisection got kind of pushed a little bit. But as I gave you a hint before, we do have Camp Beagle now, and so that is very active at the moment. I think there's been a couple of splits in that movement, but don't need to go into that. But there is a thing about focus on beagles or focus on dogs, or one species at a time. These kind of ideas, which might not go well. And again, we've then got the kind of cranky vegan issue of it doesn't matter if people are not vegan, right? And so there's quite a lot of people at Camp Beagle who are not vegan. So that can be an issue within the modern movement, which wasn't the case back in the 80s, for example. This is one of the days of action when they were trying to block the beagles coming out. As you can see, lots of yellow, that's all the police officers. And this is a good sign here. Police and MBR Acres, that's where Camp Beagle is, escort puppies for torture. So that's pretty good. Now, I think, oh yeah, I got one more to show you, I think, which is, I think, a special shout out perhaps for Speak and for Mel Broughton. Mel is still in prison, as far as I know, but they have kept things going, really, for in terms of vivisection, but sometimes fairly low key. If you look at their Facebook page, they complain that, you know, oh, it's 4 days after the World Day for Laboratory Animals, and now we can only get 6 people out, you know, that type of thing. But the World Day for Laboratory Animals still goes on, but instead of thousands of people, you're now getting kind of hundreds. And then before I came on the air, I said to Ronnie, what's going on apart from Camp Beagle and Speak? And he said there's a National Day of Action against the British Heart Foundation coming up in February. And he says there's also regular weekly protests against Sequani Animal Research Lab in Ledbury. So there are some things that are still kind of bubbling under in terms of vivisection. Whether it will ever get back to the glory days, as it were, of the 80s, I'm not so sure. And I'm not so sure whether the focus should go back off veganism. I think that that would probably be a mistake. Just going to have a quick scan through the chat and see what I've missed. All right. We're talking about the language then. I'm against animal testing. Self-identified, vegan strongly defend it. Yeah. Jeremy, thinking about language, what's going on? We don't cut them, it's okay. Yeah, that is an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's the kind of problem with vivisection. Although even the official definition now is extended to animal experimentation, so it would kind of feature all of that as well. What's this one? I've not really thought about it. I've always said animal testing, and that's what I've always heard. Yeah. Jeremy, I prefer breeding use and murder through animal testing. Yeah, well, that's a pithy little slogan, Jeremy. So, yeah. And then Debbie's saying most people don't really know what the term vivisection means. Yeah, but that's where the idea of ripening up comes from. I mean, the same thing would be said about most people don't know what animal rights means in a philosophical sense. And that means that we haven't done a very good educational job, if that's the case. But it also means that we could make them aware. And you would start that with the journalists. You know, the movement seems to have lost its ability to liaise with journalists. And it could be the internet age, this, in the sense that back in my day, you get to know individual journalists, and you would, because they would be like connected to a newspaper or a radio station for a long time, right? I don't think nowadays that kind of happens. So I don't suppose you can get that kind of relationship. But if you did, it would mean that if they did make a mistake, you would go back and kind of gently say, well, you know, actually there's this and that, you know, and that kind of, and that would improve their coverage for the next time. So yeah, so that would be a kind of ripening up thing, which would probably start, I would think, with the journalist. Oh yeah, I've shown you that one. That's extreme animal torture. Exactly, Deb. Need a phrase that gets the horror across to the general public. Yeah, I get that. I can see that point completely. Yeah, Michael's making the point that I kind of alluded to, which is that animal testing is almost a bit of a soft, it seems a bit soft. Animal experimentation, animal research. See, again, is animal research a bit vague? You know, maybe there's no kind of perfect phrase as usual, I suppose. What's this one, Deb? Michael, agree. Have you seen the jokes about animal testing depicted other animals sitting at desks? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, joke. Have you got joke in inverted commas there? It should be, shouldn't it? If they're as bad as that. Yeah. Tester doesn't really say much. Jeremy is saying. Yeah. Well, here you've got the problem. I mean, this is the extrapolation problem, in the sense that, and this goes all the way back to that Galen situation about maybe all the mistakes he made is because he wasn't allowed to research on humans. And the logic of vivisection is to do it on humans, let's face it, because otherwise you're going to get all the species difference problems. You're going to get the extrapolation of data kind of problems. Not that human testing completely eliminates that anyway. For example, if you test on elderly people in order to find something for young people, then that might not translate too well, and vice versa. Also, gender might play a role, and also some racial characteristics can certainly play a role in terms of things like sickle cell amnesia. That kind I probably said that wrong. And those kind of issues. So the lots of variables that can kind of get in the way. But in terms of the people that did research on humans, and of course in recent history we've obviously got the Nazis, but also the Japanese in the Second World War as well. That is kind of the logic of vivisection, because it kind of gets around those problems. If you look at something like thalidomide, for example, this is the kind of complexity of the problem, that thalidomide caused a lot of these teratogenic, the monster-making kind of effects because of the metabolism. So the mother would take, the pregnant woman would take the product and then metabolize it. And so that creates a metabolite. And then that metabolite goes into the placenta, which also metabolizes the metabolite. And then that goes into the fetus, who then also metabolizes it. So this product is getting metabolized 3 times. And so this is the complexity of trying to get to the bottom of these issues when you're doing these kind of tests. People are bringing up some good points about testing. But I think many know what it means when we talk about it. It's generally understood. Maybe add anti-exploratory harmful testing. Yeah, then you got obviously the toxicity tests and this kind of stuff. Yeah. Even non-vegans are aware of cruelty-free. Yeah, so I mean, I suppose in terms of, although I don't like the name cruelty, I can understand why it's on the, that they changed the name from the BOAV to Cruelty-Free International, because that has become a kind of thing. Although it's ironic, isn't it? Because cruelty-free, from an anti-vivisection point of view, doesn't necessarily mean vegan, doesn't it? I mean, for example, just down the road from me, there is a bottle of shampoo which is endorsed by PETA, and it's got honey in it. And I believe some of the BOAV stuff are not, kind of strictly speaking, vegan. So you've tended to have the two logo, the kind of leaping bunny for the vivisection part of it, and then the vegan one to make sure. I think if you get a product with just one of those symbols on it, it could be a problem. Yeah. As Roger is narrating and using the term experimenting on animals. Yeah, well, I was reading a lot from Kim Stolberg, so don't blame me. Right, let's just see if there's anything else. Yeah, so there's a big long chat about the language. So very good, excellent stuff here. I will have to come back and read it when I haven't got the stress of being live and all that. Same to that. Don't know what that means. Okay. Oh, then we moved on to Jeremy Corbyn. Is Corbyn, as far as I know, long-term vegetarian? And of course, with a lot of long-term vegetarians, the answer is, you know, at this stage, but at any time. I mean, kind of why, isn't it? You know, but I mean, long-term vegetarianism is an odd thing. You know, a lot of people thought of it as a gateway to veganism and all this kind of stuff. So long-term vegetarianism has always been a bit of a puzzle for vegans, isn't it? You know, so there you go. Love the merch. Yeah, there was some good stuff on there. Remember one of the Animus badges I used to love, which was says beans means vegans farts, and it was a play on one of the adverts that were on the TV about Heinz beans. But that was actually very popular. So some of the rude ones, you can imagine. I mean, even now with the VIP, some of the rude ones are very popular. You know. So now this is interesting. I think the LD50 test has still been done. All right. Okay. Yeah, I think Kim was saying in Britain. And the LD, yeah, so we'd only talk about Britain there. So presumably, you know, Brexit will have changed everything as well, I suppose. So, I mean, the European Union has agreed to a membership-wide ban on cosmetic testing. So does that apply to Britain now? Although they seem to have had their own just British-wide ban at the same time. But I imagine Brexit has altered things in a fairly complicated ways, I suppose. So I'm a mind reader, okay? I don't think so, but never mind. Rights language, okay. Okay, folks. Well, let's just get to the bottom of this in case I'm missing anything. Oh yeah, I think this is Joanna saying that, yeah, indeed a vegetarian. Unfortunately, still is. He should go vegan. He should indeed. And I mean, you know, Corbyn has kind of rubbed shoulders with our movement for long enough now. Yeah, Jeremy reminds us of this Save Ralph short film, of course. Jeremy, you kind of, I kind of forgotten about that, but you've, it's like an animated thing, wasn't it? And you promoted it heavily about, what, getting off for 2 years ago now. I'll have to check that out again. Anybody remember the Save Ralph film? I think it was on YouTube and probably still is. I don't know. Yeah, Colleen, this is the kind of cranky vegan area now, of course, is that the fact that there are some people who are opposed to vivisection, but it's the same with, I mean, it was very odd to me around 2000, 2001, there was a huge foot and mouth problem. And there's also a live export campaign. And one of the lead groups in that was Compassionate World Farming. And, you know, it was said in the press, kind of, you know, in between the lorries coming and throwing stones at the lorries and everything, they would be kind of eating ham sandwiches and stuff. And so, yeah, to vegan ears, that's very odd. Someone like Jake will say, yeah, but we should kind of be tolerant of it to an extent. I mean, it's a question of, you know, you're tolerant, but for how long? And also the issue that I always bring up is that I wouldn't want people like that to be the spokesperson for the campaign, because they're bound to say the wrong thing, you know. I mean, we've had that in the past, you know. Oh, you don't have to be a vegetarian to care and this kind of stuff, and you know that's not the right message at all. And then you've got the other side of it. Vegans were protesting. Actually, one of the pro-vivisection groups is called Protest, isn't it? So, which is, I suppose it's a thing. Yeah, just a reminder about Mel, HMS Peterborough. I don't know the I don't know the current regulations about what you can send and how frequently and all that kind of stuff, but it wouldn't be too hard to find it out, I don't think. Right. I think we're maybe through. I think what I'm going to do next week is probably go back to the account of the Animals film, which we started series 1 with. So we'll probably go back to that. I've actually got some new stuff. One great thing about, as it were, having to do this series again is the fact that gives you a chance to add bits in that were missed out from before. So that's pretty good. Right, people. I think I've taken up enough of your time already. Oh, has that been an hour? Really? Oh, blimey. I really didn't know it was an hour. That's really flown past. So, everyone, I would like to thank you for tuning in, and I shall see you next week. Yeah, I still haven't totally settled on the day and the time, but I think it'll probably be this, at least for now. So, unless somebody comes up with a pretty good reason for not doing it, just get rid of this comment if I can find it again. There we go. Right. Okay, everyone. And Bernie, I think your ears are going to be fine for the outro. So bye for now, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome along to episode 2 of the new Vegan Time Tunnel. So today we're looking at this, which is the Animals film. That's the DVD version, 26 years after it first came out, I believe. So in terms of the series, the idea is for week on week, we're going to hopefully put together a kind of archive of some of the most significant things that have happened in the animal advocacy movement. And so it should build up week after week and then become, an archive for people to, as it were, explore the history of our movement, which is obviously very important. Okay, without further ado then, let's go with the time tunnel. So the Animals film, I suppose the first thing we could say about the Animals film is that it's kind of my generation's Earthlings, I suppose. It had a really big effect when it came out. It's a film from 1981, and it was created by Victor Schonfeld and also Miriam Allure as well. And so it was a big deal, as I said, when it came out. So we're going to go through a few of the things about the film. I'm going to show you an edited version of the trailer. I've kind of tried to cut out. I'll try to cut out the bit that might get us with a copyright strike. But I've also tried to cut out a bit of the more gruesome stuff. But it's not too bad. But I will kind of give you a warning about that, if you like. So there's that to come. So the Animals film then. So what we've got here is the DVD, that picture above me. That's the one I've just shown you. So that's the DVD, and the poster for the DVD is the one in the middle. Really, the one to the right is how it looked when it came out in VHS form, which is videotape. I suppose there might be some people nowadays who don't know what VHS means. It stands for Video Home System. So, yes. Well, I mean, we're going to go back to film as well, in the sense that when we showed it in Liverpool, it was 16mm film. So the story starts in 1977 when Victor Schonfeld was in New York, and he was part of something called the New York Political Film Group. And he said that he was interested in using what he calls cinematic language to challenge habitual thinking. And so he conceived the idea of the Animals film. He said that he thought that through cinema, then he could make people feel a different way. I'm going to talk a little bit about his rationale, because they insisted on it being released in theaters before it was released eventually to TV. And so Schonfeld conceived the Animals film as a consciousness-raising event, really. It's quite long. It's over 2 hours. So it's kind of a long event, if you like. The music is by Robert Wyatt. In fact, I still have my original soundtrack LP, which runs, both sides runs to 28 minutes. So it's quite short in that sense. And then also the title song, which is the bit that's cut out of the trailer, which is why a lot of it is going to be silent, was by Talking Heads. And it was called Mind. And you see there right at the bottom corner, I need something to change your mind, which is one of the refrains of the film, and of course, the song as well. So the idea was to use cinema to challenge ways that people, think about things. And he wanted to release it in cinemas first. And in the DVD version, which has got a really good interview with Victor Schonfeld, he explains the rationale, and he says there's a big difference between watching a film, as it were, in the dark, pay for a ticket, you go in, and that's a different experience than watching something on TV, or nowadays watching something streamed when people will be kind of taking a break, making a cup of tea, this kind of stuff. And so he thought that the cinematic experience would be really powerful, because in a kind of weird sense, people are a little bit trapped there, because they're in a cinema with a lot of other people. So that's the kind of rationale. The film industry itself was rather shocked by the idea of putting out a full-length documentary at the time, although it's quite common now. I mean, you might think of the documentaries by people like Michael Moore, for example. And so in that sense, it's not an unusual thing now, but it was then. In fact, one of the things about the Animals film is it's quite groundbreaking in that sense. Now, this is interesting because, as many of you might know, I used to be a projectionist, and this is the quad. So this size of poster was called a quad in the cinema business, and so this was the ones that used to go outside theaters. And the person holding it is Kim Stallwood, who we met last time in the I'm getting commentary from behind in the first time tunnel about the vivisection movement in Britain. And so he's holding his signed and also framed edition of the quad. It was an AA film, so in modern day that would probably mean a 15 rating. Schonfeld found a radio personality to fund it. She had 2 flats in New York City, one of which was apparently used exclusively for the stray cats that she looked after. And so she offered to fund the film. And Schonfeld said that she actually said, look, I don't want you to go around begging people for a lot of money, lots of different people. So tell me how much it's going to be and I'll pay for all of it. And so that's what the agreement was. So they came up with an initial budget of $68,000. But Schonfeld said that in actual fact, in the end, it was about 10 times that. So it was a bigger thing than they kind of knew that they were getting into, because everyone in this adventure was kind of breaking ground. This film shows some scenes that have never been shown before, but also the filmmaking technique and the people involved, this was the first time that they did it. Now, my first involvement with this is back in Liverpool. I was part of something called the Merseyside Animal Rights Committee, and we showed the film in a public showing at this place, which is called the Blue Coat Chambers, which is in Liverpool. And so you go up that ramp in the middle there, you turn right, and there's kind of like a place where you can show films. So that was our first engagement with the film. We had a 16mm copy that was sent to us in order to do that. And when I was advertising this time tunnel, there's quite a lot of people commenting, "Oh yeah, we showed it in here, we showed it there," you know. And so that's how it came. So it was official cinema first, then these kind of independent cinemas, and then the TV. So a year later, we're up to 82, and this is when Channel 4, which was a brand new TV station in Britain, launched. And so they decided to show the Animals film in their first week. And in fact, it was on the third night of broadcasting, which is November the 4th. And the audience was estimated at over 1 million people, which was pretty good. And November the 4th, they didn't know it at the time, but they released it during World Vegan Month, which was quite neat. But World Vegan Month didn't exist back in those days. So Jonathan Porritt, who was a very well-known environmentalist, I think he's a lord now, and also David Winner, who's an author, they write that with over 1 million viewers, the screening is regarded as, quote, an important moment in the growth of public awareness of animal exploitation. And so, as I said, it was a pretty big deal back in the day, in the sense that people were seeing footage that they'd never, ever seen before. This was kind of groundbreaking in that sense. It was also shown again on Channel 4 during, 1991. And they had a series going back in their own history, and they called it Banned. And so the Animals film was re-shown again. So the original film is 136 minutes long. And as I said, it was released in cinemas with the AA certificate. There was no cuts at all in terms of the one that went out to the theatres, because the British Board of Film Classification, which used to be called the British Board of Film Censors, gave it the AA signage, which meant that, you know, nobody young would see it, as it were. When it came to the TV, though, it was different. The Independent Broadcasting Authority were worried about some scenes, and so they called Schonfeld in, and there was a negotiation about some scenes should be cut. Now, the scenes they wanted to cut, you would have thought would be the graphic things showing animal use, right? It wasn't that. It was they wanted to cut some scenes involving animal activists. And so they were worried that the film was so powerful and so kind of persuasive that this was a real moral problem, that it could incite crime or even lead to civil disorder, or kind of promote the idea that this is so bad that direct action is therefore justified. So that was the rationale. The film was so devastating that illegal activities would, as it would, be justified, and it might even prompt them. So in the end, Schonfeld did agree to cut about 7 minutes, which was mainly at the end. In the DVD version, you do get the original, and then you get a new director's cut, as well as some little extras. Geraldine Buck, a prize-winning author, said in 1982 that some scenes from the Animals film will stay with her forever. And she writes, quote, "The film ends with a desperate optimism. There is footage of the British Animal Liberation Front's raids on research establishments and sabotage of hunts." Slightly wrong, but it doesn't really matter. "After watching 2 hours of appalling atrocities, the only appropriate response to the ALF criminal activities is a rousing and prolonged cheer. So that's what the film censors were a little bit worried about, and the TV people were worried about, in the sense that that was, you know, coming out in the reviews from the journalists, kind of like, you know, go for it type thing. And so they decided then that they'd have to have some cuts. And so reluctantly, Schoenfeld agreed that 7 minutes will be cut. But in terms of the rest of it, it was shown on TV in full, all at once, with no ad breaks. So again, that was fairly unusual. It features quite a lot of cartoons and interviews and adverts to break the film up. And Schoenfeld talks about that as well in the DVD interview, in the sense that they didn't want it to be relentless. And the Animals film is seen as not as relentless as something like Earthlings or Dominion, in the sense that they deliberately broke it up using other bits, you know, like, as I said, cartoons and stuff. In fact, you'll see a couple of examples of the cartoon in the trailer, which I'm going to show you now. So in terms of content warning for the trailer, I've cut the sound quite a lot. So a lot of this is silent. And I've also cut a couple of visual scenes, but there still are scenes involving chicks on a conveyor belt. There is a really weird, seems to be an advert or a promotional film for the turtle soup business, which really indicates, you know, attitudes at the time. And you would think nowadays that you know, the industry would have known not to talk in those terms. And then right at the end, there's a little bit of footage of monkeys being experimented on, but it's not particularly graphic. But the interesting thing is what the narrator is saying. So let's see if we can put this on. So this is how the film starts, but the kind of talking heads music is on at this stage. This is the bit I've cut out because I thought we might get into some copyright problems. As I said, again, you've got to think that some of these, that's an example of the cartoon, some of these scenes had never really been seen before, you know, certainly not in cinemas, and then later in TV.
Use this bat here for loading out boars. You get two boars fighting, they can cut themselves up pretty good with it. I go through and I bust their noses. Usually after you bust their nose, gives them something else to think about.
And you got a terrible view about fur now.
I would take a dim view of making a purchase of fur coat if I gave it any thought. I just eliminate it from my mind.
Yeah, I always remember that scene where I just eliminated it from my mind. In fact, there is another scene involving some teenage kids, and one of them was saying, "Well, as long as I didn't see it, I will eat flesh, you know, but I wouldn't want to see it being produced," kind of thing. And of course, we still get that kind of issue nowadays, don't we? So it's kind of, as it were, known to us.
Don't underrate the strength of the vested interests of various kinds, agricultural, scientific, and particularly in the chemical and the pharmaceutical industries, and especially, of course, factory farming.
So that voice there was Lord Lord Houghton, who played a big role in trying to get animals into politics in the 1980s. And the actual scene, of course, was one of the McDonald's adverts, you know, the kind of hamburger patches and this kind of stuff, the idea that hamburgers grow like vegetables.
Upside down and completely helpless, they're lugged unceremoniously off to the cannery. At this point, it's just as well a turtle only sticks his neck out once. Seems he recognizes a friend. Well, he'll soon be in the soup himself.
So I don't think the industry would say that nowadays.
On a Saturday morning, you'd have nothing better to do but protest about animals, you know?
500 rads of gamma radiation, delivered at the rate of 50 rads per day, failed to degrade the performance of the test animals in either accuracy or reaction time. a definite advantage in civil defense, military, and spaceflight operations. And somehow, one gets the impression that the chimpanzee is proud of his contribution.
And that's the end of the audio. And again, really interesting kind of attitudes being shown in that, being proud of their contribution, as though they've got anything to do with it. And then just at the end, there's just an advert for the DVD. So I thought I'd leave that in. Again, might stop me getting some kind of ban or some kind of copyright thing. So audio DVD people, I suppose that's what I've got to say. Right, let's switch back to this. So as I said then, the Animals film is seen as not as graphic and as relentless as Earthlings or Dominion. But interesting, a lot of people will know Benny Malone, and he said that he found it the other way around. He found this one, this film was a bit more disturbing than those. Probably kind of the reverse of the reason, I suppose. So it features cartoons, as I said, and those interviews and all the adverts to break it up and that kind of stuff. Things that I remember about it is there's one scene which I've never forgotten, which is a veal farmer talking about his industry, and he stood there with the veal unit behind him, and he said, "This is really good, it's going really well, and we're very pleased with it. You know, the business is going fine. The only thing we don't like is the confining." So Schoenfeld said, "What do you mean by confining?" And he said, "Well, we have to be here, 7 days a week, twice a day to feed them and all this kind of stuff." So this veal farmer was complaining about confining, but he was complaining about his confinement rather than the other animals, which is, I suppose, pretty typical. And then the other bit that I remember is Schoenfeld is going around saying, "Do you eat animals?" I think he just saying that as an opening kind of thing. And a woman said, "Well, yeah, I work in a meat packing plant." And Schoenfeld said, "So what do you feel about that?" And she suddenly gets quite defensive. And she goes, "Well, I've never really thought about it." And so Schoenfeld said, "Well, now that you're thinking about it," wouldn't let her off the hook, as it were. And then she's kind of looking around to see what she can do, and said, "Well, I wouldn't eat cats or dogs." And he says, "Why?" And he, "Oh, well, they don't seem very tasty." And so it's really quite interesting, the fact that once she was questioned about what she was doing, it became, very kind of difficult for her, if you like. So as I said, a lot of groundbreaking stuff in there in terms of film. It was the first time that debeaking was filmed. And that particular shot of debeaking became quite famous and became used over and over again in the movement until we got more modern footage. I'm not going to show you any of it because it's pretty gruesome. And also, again, content warning about language. The Animals film was the first time I ever heard the phrase rape rack. And it was in relation to pig breeding at the time. And I did a podcast with Harold Brown, who was a farmer and now is a vegan activist. And I said, "Do you think the farmers still use the phrase rape rack?" And he said, "They do, but they don't publicly anymore. So they might use that kind of phrase amongst themselves, but they know it's not a good PR thing, so they've dropped it publicly, if you like." In terms of the effect of the film, a lot of people go vegetarian and stroke vegan because of it, including people like human rights lawyer Michael Mansfield, also Elvis Costello, the singer, quite a few others, but those are the two that have been mentioned in the blurb, as it were. Okay, now we're moving forward now to the reaction, which is quite a few years later. This is 2009. And so the director of the Animals film was asked to go on the BBC World Service, the radio, to do 2 shows about the Animals film, looking back, as it were, 28 years later. And so these were 2 World Service specials, and you can get them by just Googling it. I think BBC One Planet, you'll find them. And his other remit was to report on what he thought was the progress of the animal movement in those 28 years. And it's really evident, really, that Schoenfeld was pretty shocked by the lack of progress. So he was fairly kind of upset about the fact that the movement had done so badly. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to remove that, actually. Remove. Okay. Okay, let's put this back up. All right. Just bear with me a second. I've just got to load something else before we continue. There we go. Right. Okay. Okay. So the One Planet specials. Schoenfeld interviews quite a lot of people, amongst them being food expert Professor Tim Lang. He was a big voice in Britain at one point. Ecofeminist Vandana Shiva, author Joan Denea, human rights lawyer Michael Mansfield, as I mentioned before. Also, the then head of the HSUS, Wayne Purcell, law professor Gary Francione. And I was interviewed. I had to go down to a local Dublin radio station to do some taping, but my bit was cut, unfortunately, but never mind. It's very clear, though, in terms of these two programs. The first one is about farming. The second one is about vivisection. The first one is by far the more interesting from the movement point of view now, in the sense that he was really assessing the progress. And both Mansfield and Schoenfeld are clearly very disappointed about the movement's progress in 28 years. He expected those to be, much better, much further ahead, if you like. For example, Schoenfeld said that the likes of the HSUS and PETA and the RSPCA all work with animal user industries to produce tiny reforms that leave the exploitation of other animals, as he puts it, intact. And when they do get these tiny victories, they then claim a victory. And he's very disappointed about this. So I'm going to play you this little clip from that, and you can see what I mean about that.
Getting a little bit soft or co-opted in your high-profile role?
I think all you need to do is look at the agriculture industry in the United States. They fear HSUS more than any other organization.
The Humane Society, like the RSPCA and PETA, has heaped praise on businesses that profit from meat eating for making small adjustments in their purchasing policies.
We've worked with corporations from Burger King to Denny's to Whole Foods.
Burger King, the fast food chain, just saying no to animal cruelty. Margaret Brennan is on the money behind the decision.
Burger King making a bold move today. The King moving to suppliers who do not confine their animals in crates or cages.
This is going to get Burger King a lot of publicity, a lot of attention.
We've worked to establish new standards for procurement policies.
BK will start slowly. 2% of eggs will be cage-free.
We are determined to charge ahead on all of these fronts.
And the new regulations the Humane Society claims as signal victories leave intact the intensive systems of exploitation, cows, pigs, and chickens consigned to short lives, packed into windowless buildings, then slaughter. I put this point to Wayne Purcell.
I generally disagree with that line of thought. I don't think that it's a minor matter to remove 20 million laying hens in California from battery cages.
But they are still confined indoors, aren't they?
Well, they may be, or they may not be, but we've had decades of activism and no success until HSUS entered the fray.
Right, so as you can see, there is a disagreement there between the parties on terms of, how good we were doing. This was a time when it was the end of the ban the battery cage campaign. And I think that the industry kind of sidestepped the movement in a sense, because they came up with the idea of the enriched battery cage. And I don't think anybody really foresaw that. And so then they had to launch campaigns against the enriched cages. And then it came up with the idea of cage free. And cage free then was translated to one big cage. And so this is always the kind of problem with that. I mean, Francione, obviously, you'd expect in terms of his contribution to the radio thing, that he was saying that, look, if all that effort in the last 28 years has been put into vegan education, we would have been a long way ahead of just kind of getting rid of the barren battery cages. And the idea of that some suppliers would have switched 2% of their eggs to cage-free. I mean, these are very kind of almost pitiful advances, really, but that's where we are in a sense. So both programs, but particularly the first one, as I said about farming, is a powerful critique of the animal movement. I can't help wondering what Schoenfeld would think of the movement right now, and I still don't think he'd be too impressed. In fact, we are working for him to be a guest on the Animal Rights Show. So if that comes forward, that would be a really kind of brilliant thing. And then finally, we have, again, this is 2009. I took part in an Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach commentary. Again, this is still online. You can find this if you go to the site and then look for commentaries. It might be under podcast, I'm not quite sure. So Gary Francione was there. Elizabeth Collins from New Zealand was there, and I was there. And we kind of assessed the first part, really, of the the Schoenfeld radio thing. I remember Elizabeth being very critical of Schoenfeld himself on the grounds that, even then, 28 years later, he was still a vegetarian. He'd been a vegetarian since he made the Animals film, but hadn't moved to veganism. So again, whether that has changed now, it would be an interesting thing, because it would be a bit shocking, really, if it hadn't. But then again, in the first one, the one about farming, he puts himself through a kind of test, because he said that he found himself as a vegetarian kind of craving flesh now and again, and so they did a kind of psychological test with him and somebody else to find out what all that. That's really kind of fascinating as well. It is really worth listening to those two things, and I think they're both only about 28 minutes long, so it's not too bad in that sense. Right, so that's the Animals films, and as I said, I suppose I would still regard it as my generation's Earthlings, and very powerful, still is. The DVD is available with its kind of director's cut and the original and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat now. As I've said, this is only the second time we're doing this new series, and I wanted to make it interactive, but it is a bit difficult to kind of switch to the chat. So I don't know whether I'm just going to have to revisit the chat at the end of each one. Something I've got to kind of work on a little bit. So yeah, Spiritual Vegan wouldn't want to watch that. No. All right. Hello, Laura. How are you doing? I was lucky enough to catch a special screening of this film in New York City about 10 years ago. It's my favorite animal rights film to this day. It's really interesting, though, because of the time it was made. There's the narrator, which is Julie Christie, the actor, obviously reading a script, but other animals are called it in the film, which probably wouldn't happen now, which is interesting. So again, I suppose mark that down on the progress side of the movement, although there seems to be a bit of pushback at the moment with that. Other people now defending the idea of calling other animals it again, which is disappointing, to say the least. Possibly the most significant moment of the early 80s. Yeah, it was. It does kind of tie in really with what we were talking about last time, which was the growth of the anti-vivisection movement in Britain, because this was a time, the early 80s, when there was a big surge in activity, and it was a kind of a peak. And some people would claim it was the largest peak we've ever had in the movement. But then, of course, all social movements, they kind of experience peaks and troughs, and I suppose the last 5 years we're on the rise again. Bomb. We need to revive that group and the concept of the power of the cinema. Yeah, it is interesting. I don't think I did it much justice really, but it is interesting, Schoenfeld's rationale for having it shown in cinemas. Because Philip Windiat, who is used to write for The Beast, and he was involved in the early days, he was part of the production of the Animals film, but he is the person who kind of interviews Schoenfeld in the DVD. But I think it was his first question: why did you want to watch one of these films? Why did you want to make one of these films? And also, what was the score about having it in the cinema as well? Colleen, that picture's I don't know which picture it is, but you're probably right. Okay. All art forms have the power to change the way people think about things, so we just really need to reclaim that concept of art. Well, I guess people would say, well, films have carried on coming out all the time, and of course now it's just a question. See, I suppose in one weird way with the internet now, if the Animals film was released now, it would just be another film that would kind of people would talk about for a few days or a few weeks, and then there'd be Land of Hope and Glory 2 or something. And so it wouldn't have the same impact in the sense that that was the go-to film for ages, I mean years, in terms of the movement, and a lot of it prompted because of the things that it revealed, it prompted a lot of lines of inquiries by other films, which was really good as well. Yes, that's the pig handler. That's right. Yeah, the use of violence, of course. Obviously this is the thing when we talk about animal rights violations, and we talk about systematic animal use, and you do start to. I mean, you can just go to someone like Gail Aisnitt's book Slaughterhouse to see the routinized kind of way that other animals are exploited and killed and have their rights violated. But also it becomes so routinized that if, for example, another animal falls off the kill line, the animal is blamed for slowing the process down and punished for not going to their death as quick as they should have done. Yeah, so that's how kind of corrupted these kind of industries can be, Yeah, Laura, you agree with Benny? Yeah. I was quite surprised when Benny told me that. I was quite surprised, but I can see the point for sure. And I suppose the cartoons and the vox pops and everything, because they break things up, I suppose maybe you're more receptive to the film and you're not kind of hiding away from it almost and kind of guarding yourself. So maybe you might remember more because of that. That'd be an interesting social psychology thing as well. One of the things that affected me most in Dominion also wasn't graphic. It was a shot of cars calmly driving past the slaughterhouse, not even noticing or caring. Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said for that, because you do notice. I mean, if we're driving along, if you're driving along a motorway with a vegan, then we'll notice the slaughterhouse trucks, and we'll notice the so-called livestock transporters, and we'll notice the butchers' vans and everything. Nobody else seems to. Even if they've got, as it were, chickens looking out of the slots, and hay flying off the back of the van, it still, people seem to be oblivious of it. And I got that impression when in my early days, in the early 80s, when we used to go sabbing, I started to notice things like, the farms and the vivisection laboratories. And again, you'd think, only we would do that, that everybody else is oblivious to it. And yet we're not responsible for these places because we're not their customers. And so the people who, as it were, oppose them know about them, and the people who buy from them, it's all oblivious to them. It's really weird. So Yeah, really powerful film. It is indeed. Now, have we got any more? Yeah, it's well, you've got that thing, and again, you could make that argument that Colleen, this is not meant for you. You're a vegan already. There's no need for you to watch this film, and in fact, you're probably not going to learn anything new in it. So, in that sense, there's no point. I mean, on Still Alive, Ronnie and I have talked about this thing about some vegans will almost like torture themselves with watching films, and sometimes I think that's also some of the rationale for people to go to the Save protests as regularly as they do, because they don't need any more footage. It's just that they buy into that concept that I have a bit of difficulty with, the kind of bearing witness thing, but it's based on that thing. Well, if they're going through it, the least I can do is watch, but it's dangerous if you do it too much. That's thing. Yeah, Bernie says we're evolving our language. That is true. It still needs to be, as it were, policed, which is uncomfortable, but it is part of the kind of reflexivity of social movement that we talk about the language we use on the grounds that we're claims makers. So our language is incredibly important. Some people say, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter, what you say," kind of thing. But it does. So seems to be right. Anything else? Very powerful film. Yeah. I thought somebody said habits. It was Colleen saying habits. Okay. Yeah, language is important. Yeah, that's our takeaway. Idea for today then. Okay, so as you can see then, this is only the second one of this new series, and we're still evolving it, and I need to do better with the with the chat somehow, but I'm not quite sure how to do it, in the sense of kind of going through it fairly concisely without stopping too much, but we'll see. Anyway, people, thanks so much for joining us, and we are at the beginning of starting our archive, so that's quite exciting in itself. And with that, I shall say goodbye and see you next week.